My husband texted me. All communication must go through my lawyer. The divorce papers are here. You have 30 days to vacate the house. I stared at the screen. 30 years of marriage wiped away in a single cowardly text message from a man who thought he could leave me with absolutely nothing. He expected me to beg. He expected me to cry and cling to his expensive leather shoes. Instead, I simply replied, "Understood." Then I cut everything off and treated him like a stranger. He thought he had played the ultimate power move, but days later, his voice on the phone would be trembling with panic. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic partner who underestimated your worth. I am Maya, 56 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon exactly 3 days before what would have been our 30th wedding anniversary. I was standing in the sunlit living room of a sprawling Buckhead mansion, carefully adjusting the drape of a silk throw blanket over a custom velvet sofa. My staging company had been hired to prepare the property for a high-end open house. It was quiet, peaceful work. Then my phone buzzed on the marble coffee table. The screen lit up with a message from Marcus, my husband. We had been distant lately, his late nights at the corporate office becoming more frequent, his excuses becoming more elaborate, but nothing prepared me for the sheer audacity of those words. All communication must go through my lawyer. The divorce papers are here. You have 30 days to vacate the house. My thumb hovered over the glass screen. For a fraction of a second, the breath left my lungs. The house he was demanding I vacate was our $1.5 million estate in Atlanta. A house I had poured my soul into decorating every room, hosting every family Thanksgiving, and building a life I thought was secure. But the shock vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I did not drop to my knees. I did not dial his number to scream or demand an explanation. Instead, a flood of memories washed over me, but not the romantic kind. I remembered the early days. I remembered 25 years ago, working double shifts at the county hospital, my feet aching so badly by the time I got home that I could barely stand at the stove to cook his dinner. I worked those grueling hours, smelling like bleach and cheap coffee, to pay his tuition at Emory University. I bought his first cheap suit for his business school interviews, while I wore thrift store shoes with cardboard lining the soles to cover the holes. I built the very foundation that Marcus stood upon to become the charismatic, arrogant corporate vice president of logistics he was today. And now, he wanted to discard me with a text message. He thought my little boutique home staging business was just a cute hobby to keep me busy while he conquered the corporate world. He had no idea what I had actually built while he was busy looking down on me. I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and typed a single word. Understood. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and calmly went back to adjusting the silk throw blanket. By the time Marcus came home to our estate that evening, I was already prepared. He walked through the heavy mahogany front doors at exactly 7 o'clock. I could hear the familiar sound of his expensive leather briefcase dropping on the entryway table, followed by the heavy sigh he always used to announce his presence. It was a sigh meant to tell the whole house how exhausted and important he was. I was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly sipping a cup of chamomile tea. 3 large suitcases were stacked neatly by the back door. I had only packed my clothes, my personal documents, and the family photos that mattered. I left behind all the flashy diamond tennis bracelets and designer handbags he had bought me over the years to show me off at his corporate dinners. Marcus stepped into the kitchen freezing when he saw the luggage. He had dressed for a battle. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid. He was expecting a hysterical woman. He was expecting tears, thrown plates, and desperate pleas for him to reconsider. The absolute silence in the room unsettled him deeply. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tailored silk tie, trying to regain his dominant posture. "I see you got my message," he said, his voice dripping with that condescending tone he usually reserved for his junior employees. I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth, and did not say a word. I just looked at him, really looked at him. He was 58, his hair graying at the temples, a man who believed his own hype and forgot who helped him write it. My utter silence seemed to irritate him. He took a step closer, puffing out his chest, needing to hear himself speak. "Listen, Maya, there is no need to make this ugly," he said smoothly. "You have to be realistic. We have simply grown apart. You never matched my ambition. I am a vice president now. I have high-profile clients to entertain, corporate galas to attend. I need a partner who understands my world, not someone who arranges throw pillows for a living. You have 30 days to find a nice apartment. My lawyer will make sure you get a fair settlement to cover your basic needs." I let his words hang in the air. Let them echo off the expensive marble countertops I had chosen and paid for. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to defend my worth so he could have the satisfaction of shooting me down and proving his superiority. I placed my teacup on the saucer with a soft clink. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my linen trousers. "Could you step to the left, Marcus?" I asked quietly. My voice was completely steady, betraying no emotion whatsoever. He blinked, thrown off balance by the mundane request. "What?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "You are blocking the hallway," I said, pointing past him. "I need to get my garment bag." I walked right past him, our shoulders barely brushing. As I passed, I could smell the faint trace of an unfamiliar, overly sweet perfume mixed with his expensive cologne, the scent of another woman, a younger woman. But even that did not break my composure. It only confirmed that I was making the exact right move. I retrieved my garment bag from the hall closet and walked back to the kitchen, adding it to my neat pile of luggage by the door. Marcus was staring at me, his face twisting with a mixture of confusion and sudden anger. He hated being ignored. He hated not controlling the narrative. "Are you not even going to fight for this?" he demanded, gesturing wildly around the beautiful kitchen. 30 years, Maya. And you are just packing up and leaving without a single word." I picked up my purse and reached inside, pulling out the heavy set of keys to the house. I walked over to the marble island and set them down, giving them a slight push so the metal slid across the smooth surface, stopping right in front of his hands. "You asked for 30 days, I said, looking him dead in his eyes. "I am giving you the house in 3 hours. Enjoy the quiet, Marcus." I turned my back on him, picked up the handles of my 2 largest suitcases, and walked out. I did not ask for his help. I dragged them out the back door, down the stone steps, and toward my car. He followed me to the door, shouting something out into the driveway about how my lawyer better not try any cheap tricks because his corporate legal team would crush me in court. I did not look back. I loaded the trunk, shut it with a firm thud, and climbed into the driver's seat. As I pulled out of the long, winding driveway of the estate, I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror. 30 years of my life gone in a single evening, but I was not leaving empty-handed. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth and dialed a number I had saved on speed dial months ago, back when I first noticed the unexplained bank withdrawals and the late-night texts he thought I was too oblivious to see. The line rang twice before a sharp, confident voice answered the phone. "Desiree Washington, attorney at law." "Hello, Desiree," I said, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. The evening sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the Atlanta skyline. "It is Maya." Desiree chuckled softly on the other end of the line. "I take it he finally made his move?" she asked. "He did," I replied, merging onto the highway. "He sent the text this afternoon and served the papers. He thinks he is kicking me out. He thinks he holds all the cards and that I am walking away with nothing but the clothes on my back." I paused at a red light, a genuine dangerous smile finally breaking across my face for the first time all day. "He took the bait, Desiree," I said smoothly. "Initiate phase 1. Let him think he has won. Let him get very comfortable in that big empty house before we pull the rug completely out from under him." Because what Marcus Jenkins did not know was that the woman he just discarded did not just fluff pillows for a living. I secretly owned the LLC that held the debt on his precious corporate trust. I owned the very board he was trying to play chess on. And the game was just getting started. 3 days had passed since I walked out of my own home and left the keys on the marble counter. It was Sunday afternoon. In the Jenkins family, Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law Vivian house was an absolute institution. It was a tradition that could not be broken by rain or snow or even a looming divorce. For 30 years, I had been the one to arrive early. I would tie an apron over my Sunday clothes and help Vivian season the collard greens and fry the chicken. I decided today would be no different. I was not going to let Marcus take my family traditions away from me. I baked my famous peach cobbler from scratch, just like I always did. I wrapped it in foil to keep it warm and drove to Vivian House in the suburbs. I walked through the front door with my head held high. The house smelled like butter and spices and roasted meat. Everything felt completely normal. My 33-year-old daughter Tasha was sitting on the living room sofa scrolling through her phone. Her husband Bradley was standing by the television. Bradley was a junior investment banker who always looked like he had just stepped off a golf course. He was wearing a pastel polo shirt and his usual smug expression. Tasha did not look up when I walked in. Bradley gave me a tight, polite nod that did not reach his eyes. Vivian was in the kitchen stirring a large pot. She gave me a forced smile that told me she already knew about the divorce papers. Vivian always thought the sun rose and set with her son Marcus. To her, he could do no wrong. I simply placed my peach cobbler on the dining table and went to the kitchen sink to wash my hands. I was calm. I was centered. I was ready for whatever Marcus was planning. At exactly 4 o'clock, the front door opened. I could hear Marcus' heavy footsteps in the hallway, but he was not alone. I heard the sharp click of high heels on the hardwood floor, a sound that definitely did not belong to anyone in our family. I dried my hands on a towel and walked out of the kitchen. Marcus was standing in the center of the living room. His chest was puffed out and his chin was raised in that arrogant way he perfected in the corporate boardroom. Standing right next to him, holding his hand, was a woman. She looked to be about 32 years old. She was wearing a skin-tight designer dress and carrying a handbag that cost more than most people's cars. She had a perfectly smooth face and long extensions that cascaded down her back. This was Chloe, his executive assistant, the woman he was destroying our 30-year marriage for. I stopped at the edge of the living room. I felt a cold chill run through my veins. Bringing his mistress to a family Sunday dinner just 3 days after asking for a divorce was a level of disrespect I had not anticipated. It was a deliberate, calculated slap in the face. He wanted to humiliate me in front of my own family. He wanted to parade his new trophy around and watch me break down. I did not give him the satisfaction. I did not gasp. I did not drop the towel in my hands. I stood perfectly still and looked at them. Then came the betrayal that actually hurt. I looked over at my daughter. Tasha did not look shocked. She did not look angry. Instead, she put her phone down and stood up with a bright smile. She walked right past me and went straight over to the mistress. Tasha wrapped her arms around Chloe in a warm embrace. "It is so good to finally meet you, Chloe," Tasha said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Dad has told us so much about you." My heart felt like it had been dropped into a bucket of ice. My own daughter. The daughter I had carried for 9 months. The daughter I had protected from her father's emotional absence for her entire life. She knew. She had known about this woman all along, and she was welcoming her into the family while I was standing right there in the room. Bradley walked over next. He extended his hand and gave Chloe a charming smile. "Welcome to the madness," Chloe Bradley said smoothly. "Marcus has been saying the office has been a lot brighter lately. Now we know why." Marcus beamed with pride. He looked over at me with a triumphant smirk. He had orchestrated this entire scene. He had bought their loyalty. He had convinced our daughter and her husband to accept his affair by undoubtedly showering them with gifts and promises of financial support. He wanted me to feel completely isolated. He wanted me to see that he was the center of power in this family and that I was entirely disposable. I did not scream. I did not cry. I slowly walked over to the dining table. I picked up a porcelain dinner plate. I picked up a serving spoon and calmly scooped a portion of macaroni and cheese onto the plate. The entire room went silent. They were watching me. They were waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for the angry, bitter black woman stereotype they had prepared themselves to face. Bradley decided to break the silence. He walked over to the dining table and leaned against the back of a chair. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and sheer arrogance. He thought because he worked in finance and married into a wealthy family that he was the smartest man in the room. "Come on, Maya," Bradley said, his voice laced with heavy condescension. "Let us be adults about this. You have to understand the reality of the situation. Marcus is an executive now. He is a vice president of a major logistics firm. He deals with million-dollar contracts and high-stress negotiations. He needs a partner who understands the corporate world. He needs someone who can stand beside him at industry galas and speak the language of business. He needs someone like Chloe. You cannot blame him for outgrowing a woman who arranges pillows for a living. It is just the natural evolution of a successful man." I stopped plating my food. I set the serving spoon down on the pristine white tablecloth. I looked at Bradley. I looked at his expensive watch and his manicured fingernails. Then I looked at my daughter Tasha, who was standing next to Chloe, looking completely unapologetic. I thought about the thousands of times I had transferred money to her account so she could maintain the illusion of a wealthy lifestyle. I thought about the down payment on the house she and Bradley lived in, a house I paid for because Bradley Trust Fund turned out to be a complete lie, he told to impress my husband. I picked up my plate and turned to face them. My voice was low and steady and completely devoid of any warmth. "I understand perfectly, Bradley," I said. "You are absolutely right. Marcus is a very important corporate man now. He certainly needs a corporate partner, someone who understands high-level finance." I walked past Bradley and stopped right in front of my daughter. Tasha avoided my eyes. She looked down at the expensive rug under her feet. "I hope your father's new corporate partner is ready to pay off your $80,000 credit card debt." "Tasha," I said clearly, so every single person in the room could hear me, "because I just took my name off your joint accounts." Tasha's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide with pure terror. "What?" she gasped. "Mom, you cannot do that. The minimum payment is due on Tuesday. I also closed the emergency line of credit I opened for you last year," I continued smoothly. "You know the one you used to buy that luxury SUV you are driving. The bank will be drawing the balance directly from your personal checking account by tomorrow morning. I hope Bradley high-level finance skills can cover the overdraft fees." Right on cue, Tasha's phone pinged from the coffee table. It was a sharp, piercing sound in the silent room. She scrambled over to grab it. Her face drained of all color as she read the screen. It was an automated bank alert. The accounts were frozen. The available balances were zero. Bradley's face turned completely red. He lost his smug smile instantly. "Maya, that is incredibly vindictive," he stammered, taking a step toward me. "You cannot just cut her off without warning." "I did not cut her off, Bradley," I replied, looking him up and down with absolute disgust. "I simply stopped paying for her to disrespect me. She is a 33-year-old married woman. It is time for her corporate husband to step up and foot the bill." Marcus' face was a mask of pure rage. He realized exactly what I had done. He had promised Tasha the world to get her on his side, but his own assets were currently tied up in the divorce proceedings. He could not bail her out without raising red flags with his corporate board. "Maya, how dare you, Marcus!" yelled his voice booming through the living room. "You do not come into my mother's house and threaten my daughter. You are out of line. You are crazy." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his. I simply set my plate of food down on the table. I walked over to the beautiful peach cobbler I had baked. I picked up the warm, heavy glass dish wrapped in silver foil. "I am not threatening anyone, Marcus," I said quietly, holding the cobbler in my hands. "I am just leaving you to the life you chose. You wanted a corporate partner. You got one. You wanted my daughter to choose your money over my respect. She did. Now you all get to afford each other." I turned around and walked straight toward the front door. Behind me, the living room erupted into chaos. Tasha was crying hysterically, showing her phone to Bradley. Bradley was cursing under his breath, realizing his own lifestyle was about to collapse. Vivian was yelling at Marcus, asking him what he was going to do about the money. And Chloe, the beautiful young corporate partner, was standing awkwardly in the corner, realizing she had just walked into a financial war zone. I did not look back. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool Sunday afternoon air. I walked down the driveway toward my car with my peach cobbler securely in my hands. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sounds of their panic. I unlocked my car and carefully placed the dessert on the passenger seat. I smiled to myself as I started the engine. Let them eat each other alive. Phase 2 was officially underway. Monday morning arrived with the kind of sharp clarity that only a direct financial attack can bring. I was standing in the kitchen of my temporary luxury apartment overlooking the Atlanta skyline when my phone buzzed with an urgent alert. It was a formal email from Marcus' high-powered legal team. The document was filled with aggressive legal jargon demanding my immediate compliance and the formal surrender of all marital assets. But the real blow came when I logged into my personal banking application to pay the catering vendor for my staging company. Access denied. I refreshed the digital screen assuming it was a simple network error. Account frozen. Marcus had moved swiftly and ruthlessly. He had instructed his expensive corporate lawyers to file an emergency injunction freezing all of our primary joint checking and savings accounts. He wanted to drain my resources and starve me out. He assumed I was a helpless, naive housewife who relied entirely on his corporate paycheck to survive month to month. He thought that by cutting off the money supply, I would panic and come crawling back to him begging for a meager settlement just to keep the lights on and buy groceries. He wanted to break my spirit before the divorce even reached a courtroom. I stared at the zero available balance on my glowing screen and simply smiled. He was playing amateur checkers while I had been playing high-stakes chess for the last decade. I calmly opened a completely separate and secure application on my phone and logged into the corporate account for Onyx Horizon, LLC. The balance sitting in that highly guarded commercial account was more than enough to buy Marcus and his entire legal team 3 times over. I smoothly transferred exactly what I needed to cover my vendors and poured myself another cup of dark roast coffee. Let him think he had successfully backed me into a corner. Let him celebrate his petty little victory in his empty mansion. He had absolutely no idea that his attempt to financially ruin me was simply adding more fuel to a fire he could never extinguish. The sheer audacity of his actions only confirmed that I was making the right choices. I sipped my coffee and watched the city wake up feeling more powerful than I had in 30 years. Just as I was setting my ceramic coffee mug down on the granite island, my phone began to ring loudly. The caller ID displayed a bright picture of Bradley, my incredibly smug son-in-law, standing on an exclusive golf course wearing his signature pastel polo shirt. I knew exactly why he was calling me so early in the morning. After the absolute disaster at Sunday dinner, where I publicly cut off my daughter Tasha from her credit cards, Marcus had undoubtedly deployed Bradley to do his dirty work. Bradley worked as a junior investment banker at a mid-level firm and fancied himself a master manipulator of people and funds. He thought he could use his slick corporate charm and financial buzzwords to pump me for sensitive information about my legal strategy. I answered the phone and immediately placed it on speaker, resting it gently on the cool granite countertop. "Good morning, Bradley," I said, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant and completely devoid of the anxious tension he was desperately hoping to hear. "Maya," he replied, his tone dripping with fake sympathy and forced warmth. "I am so incredibly glad I caught you this morning. Tasha and I have been so deeply worried about you since yesterday afternoon. I know things are incredibly stressful right now with the divorce papers and everything going on with Marcus. I just wanted to reach out as family and offer a helping hand during this difficult transition." I leaned heavily against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest, and stared out the window. "Is that right, Bradley?" I asked softly, letting him dig his own hole. "Yes," he continued quickly, launching into his carefully rehearsed speech. "Listen, I know Marcus is playing extreme hardball with the bank accounts today. That is just how these aggressive corporate guys operate when they feel threatened. But when the dust finally settles and you get your alimony, I really want to help you manage it properly. You are not used to dealing with large sums of money or complex financial planning. I can help you invest whatever meager settlement you manage to walk away with, so you do not end up struggling in your retirement years. Plus, if you tell me what your lawyer is planning to do next, I might be able to talk some sense into Marcus and get him to go easy on you in mediation." It was a pathetic attempt at espionage, masked as familial concern. It was almost comical how transparent this little boy was. He was blatantly fishing for legal intel to feed directly back to Marcus while simultaneously insulting my intelligence. He genuinely believed I was just a simple-minded decorator who needed a big, strong man in finance to rescue her from poverty. I let a long, heavy, uncomfortable silence fill the telephone line. I wanted him to hear the absolute icy calm on my end of the connection. "Bradley," I said slowly and clearly, making sure he caught every single syllable. "I find it absolutely fascinating that you are offering me your professional financial advice, especially considering your own spectacular track record with managing personal money." He chuckled nervously, the sound tight and strained. "What do you mean, Maya? I manage millions of dollars for my top-tier clients every single day." "You might manage their money, Bradley, but you certainly do not manage your own," I replied, my voice sharpening into a lethal invisible blade. "Or did you somehow forget how you and Tasha actually bought that beautiful 4-bedroom brick house you are sitting in right now?" The line went dead silent. I could almost hear the blood draining rapidly from his smug face. "Do you remember 5 years ago, Bradley?" I continued, relentlessly pushing the knife deeper. "Do you remember sitting in my living room crying on my sofa because your alleged massive family trust fund turned out to be a completely fabricated myth? You lied to my daughter to get her to marry you. You lied to my husband to earn his corporate respect. You played the perfect role of the wealthy white finance bro, but when it came time to actually put the down payment on that house, your bank accounts were completely empty. You had absolutely nothing to your name." I did not raise my voice, but every word was a calculated, devastating strike. "Marcus was ready to throw you out on the street and demand Tasha file for an annulment, but I was the one who quietly wrote the certified check for the $200,000 down payment straight from my own staging business profits. I fronted the massive amount of money so my daughter would not be publicly humiliated among her socialite friends. I am the only reason you have a luxury roof over your head right now, so please do not ever insult my intelligence again by offering to manage my money. You need to focus entirely on how you are going to pay your own expensive mortgage next month now that I have officially cut off your wife's endless credit line. Furthermore, if you ever try to manipulate me on behalf of my husband again, I will personally call your regional manager and discuss exactly how you secured your current position." I reached out and tapped the red glowing button, ending the call before he could even form a stuttering, pathetic response. I knew for a fact he was going to run straight to Marcus in an absolute terrified panic, realizing he had just provoked the wrong woman. Later that same afternoon, I walked confidently into the sleek downtown law office of my attorney, Desiree Washington. The towering glass walls offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the bustling city, but our focus was entirely on the thick, heavy stack of financial disclosure documents spread across the polished mahogany conference table. Desiree was wearing a sharp, tailored designer suit and holding a red grading pen like a weapon. She looked up at me as I took the comfortable leather seat opposite her. A wicked, deeply satisfied smile spread slowly across her beautiful face. "Maya," she said, tapping the thick stack of legal documents with her fingernail, "your husband is an incredibly arrogant man, and arrogant men always make the biggest, most fatal mistakes." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the smooth table surface. "What exactly did you find, Desiree?" I asked, my heart beating slightly faster. She slid a thick manila folder across the table toward me. "Marcus submitted his mandatory sworn financial disclosures to the family court this morning." She explained, her voice tight with excitement. "He formally claimed his corporate trust, the marital house, and his standard checking accounts. He legally swore under penalty of perjury that this is the complete total sum of his personal and business assets." I opened the manila folder and looked closely at the highlighted bank statements and strange offshore routing numbers printed on the pages. Desiree had secretly hired a brilliant forensic accountant 3 weeks ago in quiet preparation for this exact moment. "He is hiding money," I stated, simply looking at the staggering multi-million-dollar numbers jumping off the page. "Exactly." Desiree laughed, a rich, deep sound of pure professional satisfaction. "He has hidden over $2 million in secret offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. He moved the money right before he filed the formal divorce papers, hoping to keep it completely out of the settlement negotiations and far away from you. He deliberately lied on a sworn federal legal document, thinking he was invincible. I looked up at her, feeling the hot adrenaline rush rapidly through my veins. "So we expose him right now?" I asked eagerly. "We freeze those offshore accounts immediately and take our rightful half of the money so he cannot spend it on that young mistress of his." Desiree shook her head slowly, her dark eyes gleaming with intense predatory anticipation. "Oh no, Maya," she said, leaning back comfortably in her large leather chair. "We are not going to say a single word about this right now. Let him hide it. Let him confidently lie under oath. Because the exact moment he perjures himself in front of the judge, he legally forfeits his right to any fair division of marital assets. Let him think he is completely outsmarting us. It makes the trap completely legal and absolutely inescapable. We are going to let him dig his own grave so deep he will never be able to climb out, and when he finally realizes what has happened, it will be far too late for him to save himself or his corporate reputation." The game had shifted, and I was holding every single winning card. Exactly 2 days after I discovered the hidden offshore accounts, I was standing quietly in the middle of my staging boutique in downtown Atlanta. The space was beautiful and filled with natural light from the large floor-to-ceiling windows. I had spent years curating this specific location. It was filled with premium velvet sofas and imported silk drapes. To the outside world, and especially to my husband Marcus, it looked like a cute little hobby shop for a bored housewife. A uniformed courier walked through the front glass doors and handed me a thick manila envelope. I opened it at the front desk. Inside was a formal legal document printed on the heavy watermarked paper of the logistics firm where Marcus was a vice president. It was a formal 30-day eviction notice. The letter coldly stated that his corporation had recently purchased the entire commercial building and they were terminating my lease immediately to repurpose the space. I read the document a second time, and a soft laugh escaped my lips. Marcus was truly pulling out all the stops to crush me. He convinced his corporate board to acquire the building just to evict me. He wanted to strip me of everything that brought me joy or independence. He thought that losing this tiny storefront would completely destroy my staging business and force me into absolute financial submission. He believed my entire professional world was confined to these 4 walls. He wanted me to call him crying and begging for an extension so he could hold the power over my head and dictate the terms of our divorce. But I simply placed the eviction notice on my desk and smoothed out the paper. I felt absolutely no panic and no fear. I felt free because he was making moves based on a false reality. Soon the front doorbell jingled. I looked up from my laptop expecting a client or a delivery driver. A woman walked in wearing expensive athletic wear. It was Chloe, holding a yellow tape measure and looking around with pure distaste. Walking into my place of business right after her older boyfriend served me with an eviction notice was a bold, incredibly foolish move. She stopped in the middle of the room. She looked at me with a triumphant smirk that mirrored the exact expression Marcus wore at Sunday dinner. She was here to gloat and to mark her new territory. I stood up and walked toward her. I did not raise my voice or show any sign of anger. "What brings you to my boutique today, Chloe?" I asked politely as if she were just another wandering customer. She laughed a sharp, annoying sound. "I am actually here to measure the space for my new Pilates studio," she announced proudly, waving the yellow tape measure in the air. "Marcus bought the building through his company, and he is letting me take over this prime corner spot. He said you would be vacating soon anyway since you cannot afford the rent without his money anymore." She looked around again and wrinkled her nose. "It is a good thing we are gutting the whole place because your taste is incredibly dated, Maya. All of this heavy furniture is just so sad and depressing. We need light and modern energy here, not whatever this old lady aesthetic is supposed to be." She waited for me to react. She wanted me to yell at her and tell her to get out of my store. She wanted a dramatic confrontation so she could run back to Marcus and play the innocent victim who was attacked by the bitter old wife. But I did not give her the satisfaction. I simply nodded my head and smiled a genuine warm smile. I walked over to my desk and picked up the eviction notice along with a black ink pen. I signed my name at the bottom of the release form in elegant sweeping letters. I did not fight it. I did not threaten to call my lawyer or challenge the corporate acquisition. I walked back over to Chloe and handed her the signed piece of paper. "You can give this directly to Marcus," I said softly. "Tell him I completely agree to the terms, and I will have my things out by the end of the week." Chloe looked at the signed paper in shock. Her triumphant smirk faltered for a second. She had geared up for a massive screaming match, and my total compliance completely derailed her script. "Are you seriously just giving up?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion and disappointment. "You are not going to fight the eviction at all. Why would I fight to stay in a building that no longer serves my needs?" I replied, walking back to my desk to close my laptop. "I have outgrown this space anyway. But since you are going to be the new tenant, I should probably give you a small piece of advice about the property." Chloe crossed her arms and glared at me suspiciously. What kind of advice she demanded? I leaned forward and looked her right in the eyes. "Be very careful with the plumbing in the back studio," I said, maintaining a deadpan expression. "The pipes look perfectly fine on the outside, but they leak terribly whenever the pressure gets too high. It can ruin a perfectly good foundation before you even realize there is a problem. It is funny how some things just cannot handle the pressure once the heat is turned up." Chloe stared at me, her brow furrowed as she tried to figure out if I was talking about the building or talking about her relationship with Marcus. Before she could come up with a clever response, I picked up my bag and walked past her toward the door. "Enjoy measuring the space, Chloe," I said over my shoulder. I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving her standing confused in the middle of the showroom. By Friday morning, the boutique was completely empty. I did not lift a single box myself. I hired a professional commercial moving crew to carefully pack up every piece of furniture and every silk drape. Marcus drove by the storefront on his way to work that morning, probably hoping to see me carrying boxes to a rented truck with tears in my eyes. But he only saw a clean, vacant space and a locked door. He probably thought I had moved my meager belongings into a cheap storage unit on the outskirts of the city. He thought I was defeated and retreating into poverty. He could not have been more wrong. The moving trucks did not drive to a cheap storage unit. They drove directly to an industrial district on the affluent north side of the city. They pulled up to a massive state-of-the-art commercial warehouse complex. The building was enormous, with polished concrete floors and high-tech security systems, and a fleet of pristine delivery trucks parked in the back lot. It was a facility designed to handle multi-million-dollar corporate staging contracts. It was not a place for a housewife with a cute little hobby. It was the headquarters of a rapidly expanding enterprise. I stood in the center of the vast warehouse watching the movers carefully unload my premium inventory into the designated luxury staging zones for future projects. The space I was leaving behind was barely a fraction of the size of this facility. How could I afford such a magnificent piece of commercial real estate without my husband ever knowing about it? The answer was beautifully simple. I did not just lease this warehouse. I actually owned it outright. 5 years ago, when my staging company started landing massive contracts with luxury hotel chains and high-end commercial developers, I took my soaring profits and quietly created a holding company. I named it Onyx Horizon LLC. Through that anonymous entity, I began aggressively investing in premium commercial properties and distressed debt. Marcus was so busy looking down on me and chasing younger women that he never bothered to look at the tax documents he arrogantly signed every year. He never asked about the corporate accounts because he assumed all the real money in the family came from his logistics firm. He had no idea that Onyx Horizon LLC owned this massive warehouse. He had no idea that Onyx Horizon LLC owned the properties that housed 3 of his biggest corporate competitors. And most importantly, Marcus and his entire legal team had absolutely no idea that Onyx Horizon LLC was the exact holding company that had quietly purchased the mortgage note on our primary marital estate 3 years ago. Let him enjoy his empty little storefront and his new Pilates studio. He was evicting me from a single room while I secretly owned the very ground that he and his little young mistress were standing on. The morning of our formal legal mediation arrived with a heavy gray sky, pouring rain over the sprawling city of Atlanta. I walked into the towering glass and steel building of Marcus' expensive law firm, wearing a tailored emerald green suit that commanded absolute respect. My attorney, Desiree Washington, walked right beside me, carrying a sleek leather briefcase and wearing a predatory smile that told me she was ready for blood. We were escorted into a massive sterile conference room with a polished mahogany table that stretched almost 20 feet long. Marcus was already sitting on the opposite side, looking incredibly smug. He was flanked by his lead corporate attorney, a pale older man who looked like he had never lost a case in his life. Marcus was wearing his favorite navy blue power suit, the one I bought for him 5 years ago. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and arrogant triumph. I took my seat across from him, folding my hands neatly on the cool wood surface, and simply stared at him. The mediator walked in and nervously took his place at the head of the table, trying to establish some ground rules about civility and mutual respect. Marcus waved his hand dismissively, interrupting the mediator before he could even finish his opening remarks. Marcus wanted to take control of the room immediately. He nodded to his attorney, who pulled out a yellowing document. The attorney slid the yellowing document across the long, polished table until it stopped right in front of Desiree. I recognized the thick, premium parchment paper immediately. It was a post-nuptial agreement. 15 years ago, when Marcus secured his very first massive corporate logistics contract, he came home in a complete paranoid frenzy. He told me his new corporate board required him to protect his assets from potential business liabilities. He framed it as a necessary legal shield to protect our family from aggressive corporate lawsuits. I was younger then, and I trusted my husband completely. I signed the document without having my own lawyer review it because I believed we were building a united future together. I believed his success was exactly our success. Now, 15 years later, Marcus was using that exact document as a weapon to destroy me. His attorney cleared his throat and formally announced that according to the binding terms of the 15-year-old post-nuptial agreement, I was only entitled to a one-time buyout of exactly $50,000. $50,000 for 30 years of my life. $50,000 after I paid his way through business school and funded his entire early career. $50,000 would not even cover the custom kitchen renovation I had personally financed last year. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and gave me a condescending smile. "It is a completely ironclad document, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You signed it willingly in front of a notary. I know you were hoping for a massive payout so you could maintain the luxurious lifestyle I provided for you, but business is business. Take the $50,000 and start over. It is more than enough to rent a nice little place and keep your cute staging hobby afloat for a few months." He thought he had delivered the ultimate checkmate. I simply looked at the piece of paper and then looked at Desiree. Desiree did not look panicked at all. In fact, she looked like she was struggling to hold back a burst of genuine laughter. She slowly picked up the old document and adjusted her designer reading glasses. "You know, Marcus." Desiree began, her voice smooth and dangerously calm. "I am so incredibly glad you brought this specific document to mediation today. We were actually planning to submit it as evidence ourselves, but you saved us the filing fee." Marcus frowned slightly, his smug smile faltering just a fraction of an inch. Desiree flipped to the third page of the yellowing document and tapped a specific paragraph with her manicured fingernail. "Do you remember the specific morality clause you insisted on including back then?" Marcus, Desiree asked sweetly. "You were so terrified that Maya might leave you for a wealthier man once your career took off that you forced your lawyers to draft an extremely aggressive infidelity clause. Let me read it out loud for the room just to refresh everyone's memory." Desiree cleared her throat and read directly from the page. "In the event that either party commits proven infidelity, the at-fault party completely and permanently forfeits all rights to the primary marital home and any equity contained within it, regardless of prior ownership status." Desiree lowered the paper and looked directly at Marcus. "We have stamped photographs from your Cabo vacation with Chloe and sworn affidavits from your own coworkers confirming your ongoing romantic relationship with your subordinate. You are officially the at-fault party, Marcus. According to your own ironclad document, you just completely forfeited all your rights to the $1.5 million Atlanta estate." Then Marcus threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, booming laugh of pure, arrogant relief. "Oh, Desiree," Marcus said, wiping a fake tear from his eye, "I really thought you were a better lawyer than this. Did you honestly think I would leave myself completely exposed like that? I am a corporate executive. I plan for every single contingency." Marcus leaned across the table, pointing a finger at me. "I knew about the infidelity clause, Maya. I knew exactly what it said. That is why I transferred the legal deed of the Atlanta estate into a private corporate trust 7 years ago. I do not own that house personally anymore. The logistics trust owns the property. The house is considered a protected corporate asset under my extensive business portfolio. You cannot forfeit something you do not legally own. That clause is completely null and void because the marital home technically does not exist on paper. The house belongs to the trust, and I control the trust. So my offer remains exactly the same. Take the $50,000 and disappear, because you are not getting a single dime from the sale of that house." He crossed his arms over his chest, looking incredibly proud of his own deceitful brilliance. I slowly turned my head and looked at Desiree. Desiree removed her reading glasses and let them drop softly onto the mahogany table. She did not look defeated. She looked absolutely triumphant. "You are completely right, Marcus," Desiree said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "You do not personally own the house anymore. The corporate trust owns the house, and normally that would be an absolutely brilliant legal maneuver to protect your personal assets from a messy divorce settlement." Marcus smirked and opened his mouth to speak, but Desiree quickly held up her hand to silence him. "But there is just one massive, catastrophic problem with your little corporate strategy, Marcus," she continued smoothly. "When you transferred the property into the trust, you also leveraged the equity to secure a massive business loan for your failed startup venture 3 years ago. You put the trust into extreme debt." Desiree reached down into her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy red folder. She slid it across the long, polished table. It stopped right in front of Marcus, perfectly aligned with his useless post-nuptial agreement. Marcus stared at the red folder, his smug smile slowly evaporating as a deep sense of dread began to wash over his face. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice suddenly lacking all its previous corporate authority. "Go ahead and open it, Marcus," Desiree invited, gesturing gracefully toward the folder. "It is the complete financial registry for your corporate trust. You see, Marcus trusts only protect assets when the trust is financially solvent. But your trust defaulted on its massive business loan 6 months ago. The original bank sold your distressed debt to a private commercial holding company. You might want to open that folder and carefully read the name of the private holding company that legally owns the debt on your corporate trust." Marcus reached out with trembling hands and flipped open the red folder. His eyes scanned the top page, and all the color instantly drained from his face. Printed in bold black letters across the top of the official deed transfer was the name Onyx Horizon LLC, and right below that, printed clearly on the signature line for the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of the holding company, was my name, Maya Jenkins. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my folded hands, and smiled directly into my husband's terrified eyes. "You are absolutely right, Marcus," I said softly. "You do not own the house, but you owe the bank. And unfortunately for you, darling, I am the bank." The morning sun was shining brightly through the skylights of my new commercial staging warehouse. I was standing on the polished concrete floor overseeing my team as they carefully loaded pristine delivery trucks for a corporate hotel contract. My business was thriving, completely untouched by the chaos Marcus thought he was causing in my personal life. Then my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of my primary commercial bank representative, David, who had handled my accounts for over a decade. I answered the call, expecting a routine update on my warehouse acquisition. "Good morning, David," I said cheerfully. But David did not sound cheerful. His voice was tight and nervous. "Good morning, Maya," he began, hesitating slightly before continuing. "I am calling to inform you that your primary business line of credit has been temporarily frozen and placed under immediate internal review by our risk management department." I asked David to explain exactly what was going on. "Maya," David said, lowering his voice as if afraid someone was listening. "A formal red flag was placed on your corporate profile late yesterday afternoon. The flag came from an internal source within the retail banking division. It was an anonymous tip citing potential fraudulent activity connected to your marital proceedings. The risk department had no choice but to freeze your commercial access until a full forensic audit is completed. Someone inside the bank was actively trying to sabotage my flawless business credit. I did not panic. I simply thought about the arrogant young man who had married my daughter. Bradley worked as a junior investment banker in the retail division of that exact same financial institution. He had promised Marcus he would use his banking connections to squeeze me financially and force a desperate settlement. Bradley actually thought he could play the big-shot finance guy and destroy the massive company I had built. He thought he could use his entry-level corporate access to ruin my credit and make me crawl back to his father-in-law begging for pennies. I explained exactly what Bradley had just done to my attorney, Desiree. He is playing an incredibly dangerous game, Maya Desiree said, her voice entirely devoid of fear and completely filled with predatory excitement. If Bradley used his internal employee access credentials to look up your private commercial accounts and flag them without legal authorization, he has committed a massive federal banking violation. I told Desiree that we needed to hit him back immediately and hit him so hard he would never recover his career. When I arrived at Desiree's sleek downtown law firm, she had a thick stack of printed bank statements spread across her mahogany conference table. These were the same offshore banking documents we discovered 2 days ago, proving Marcus was hiding $2 million in the Cayman Islands. Desiree pointed to a specific set of routing numbers on the very last page. "Look closely at these codes," Maya Desiree instructed. Marcus did not move that offshore money by himself. He needed someone on the inside of a major domestic bank to authorize the international wire transfers and bypass standard fraud detection protocols. I leaned over the table and stared at the alphanumeric employee identification code stamped at the bottom of the wire transfer receipt. It was a code assigned to a junior investment banker in the retail division. It was Bradley. My smug, condescending son-in-law had physically logged into his secure banking terminal and illegally authorized the transfer of hidden marital assets to help my husband commit perjury and financial fraud. Bradley had risked his entire career and freedom just to impress Marcus. I felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. Bradley wanted to play the powerful corporate banker who could freeze my credit with a single phone call. He was about to learn exactly what happens when you cross a woman who holds all the real power. Desiree printed every single piece of evidence, placing it neatly into a premium black leather binder. She handed the binder to me and told me to go have a nice long chat with Bradley Regional Manager. I drove directly to the massive regional banking headquarters located in the center of the financial district. I walked into the grand marble lobby wearing a sharp black designer suit and carrying the heavy leather binder. I approached the executive receptionist and handed her my premium business card representing Onyx Horizon, LLC. I politely informed her that I needed to speak with the regional vice president of retail banking immediately regarding a massive internal security breach and federal fraud violation committed by one of his junior employees. Less than 5 minutes later, I was escorted up to the top floor into a massive corner office. The regional manager was a stern-looking man named Richard. He stood up from his desk and shook my hand, looking deeply concerned. "Please sit down, Miss Jenkins," Richard said, gesturing to a leather chair. I took my seat and placed the heavy black binder on his polished desk. I opened the binder and slid the first page toward him. "Richard," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely authoritative, "I am a premium commercial client with this institution. Yesterday, a junior investment banker in your retail division named Bradley used his secure employee credentials to illegally access my private commercial files. He placed a fraudulent internal red flag on my account in a pathetic attempt to freeze my business credit and sabotage my staging company." Richard stared at the paper, his face turning pale. "If an employee accessed your private accounts for personal reasons, that is a direct violation of federal privacy laws," Richard said slowly. "Oh, it gets significantly worse, Richard," I replied smoothly, sliding the next stack of papers across the desk. Bradley has been actively using your banking infrastructure to help my soon-to-be ex-husband hide $2 million in illegal offshore accounts. I pointed directly to the routing authorization codes stamped on the wire transfer receipts. Those are Bradley personal employee identification numbers. He bypassed your internal money laundering protocols to route hidden marital assets to the Cayman Islands. He used your bank to commit federal fraud while sitting at his desk on your payroll. Richard picked up the papers with trembling hands. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he read the undeniable proof of financial crimes committed under his direct supervision. I expect the fraudulent hold on my commercial credit to be lifted within the next 10 minutes, Richard I said calmly, and I expect Bradley to be dealt with immediately before I decide to take this entire binder directly to the federal authorities. Richard swallowed hard and nodded rapidly. You have my absolute word, Miss Jenkins, Richard stammered, reaching for his desk phone. The hold on your account will be removed instantly, and I will have security escort Bradley out of the building immediately. He is suspended pending a full criminal investigation. I smiled politely, thanked Richard for his swift professional assistance, and walked out. I rode the glass elevator down to the lobby, feeling completely at peace. As I walked out through the revolving doors into the bright afternoon sunlight, my phone began to ring furiously. I glanced at the screen and saw my daughter Tasha name flashing wildly. I knew exactly why she was calling. Bradley had just been publicly humiliated. He had been stripped of his corporate access badges, packed his desk into a cardboard box, and marched out of the banking headquarters by 2 armed security guards in front of all his wealthy peers. His career in the financial sector was completely and permanently destroyed. I answered the phone and placed it to my ear. Tasha did not even say hello. She just started screaming hysterically into the receiver. Her voice was shrill and filled with absolute panic. "Mom, what did you do?" Tasha screamed, crying so hard she could barely catch her breath. "Bradley just called me from the parking lot. He said security threw him out of the building. He said human resources suspended him without pay, and they are bringing in federal auditors. He said you went to his boss and completely ruined his entire life. How could you do this to your own family? You destroyed my husband. You ruined his career, and now we have absolutely no money coming in." I stopped walking. I let her scream until she ran out of breath. I thought about how she happily betrayed me for the promise of cash. I did not raise my voice. I simply spoke with cold authority. "I did not ruin his career, Tasha," I said, slicing through her sobbing. "Bradley ruined his own career the exact moment he committed federal fraud to help your father hide money. He wanted to crush my business. I just handed him the mirror." I hung up and walked away from her bad choices. Sunday morning has always been a deeply sacred time in the Jenkins household, but not just for the sake of quiet spiritual worship. In the affluent circles of the Black community in Atlanta, attending our prominent megachurch was just as much about social currency and business networking as it was about genuine faith. Marcus had always understood this complex dynamic perfectly. He served on the highly respected financial advisory board of the church, and he absolutely loved to parade around the massive sanctuary shaking hands and kissing babies like a local politician running for office. He wore his religion like a tailored custom suit, using it to command respect from people who did not know what he was truly like behind closed doors. But after his spectacular failure to freeze my commercial business accounts and the humiliating public suspension of his arrogant son-in-law Bradley, he realized his corporate power was rapidly slipping away. So he decided to change his strategy entirely and attack my personal character in the one place where he thought I would be entirely defenseless and forced into quiet submission. Last Sunday, while I was busy securing lucrative new staging contracts for my massive commercial warehouse, Marcus stood in front of the congregation of 4,000 people during the testimony portion of the morning service. He actually cried real heavy tears at the pulpit. He put on an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation and deceit. He told thousands of devoted people that his heart was completely broken into pieces because his wife of 30 years had suddenly lost her faith and abandoned their sacred marriage covenant. He painted himself as the devoted, long-suffering Christian husband who was desperately fasting and praying for his wayward, rebellious wife to return to their home. He completely omitted the glaring fact that he was the actual person who coldly filed the divorce papers via a text message, and he conveniently forgot to mention the 32-year-old corporate mistress he proudly brought to our family Sunday dinner just days prior. He weaponized the entire church congregation against me playing the innocent wounded victim to a massive crowd of sympathetic and deeply gullible worshipers who hung on to his every word. The social fallout from his theatrical holy performance was immediate and intensely suffocating for me. By early Monday morning, my personal phone began ringing absolutely non-stop with incoming calls from the older traditional women in the congregation. These were the esteemed church mothers who sat in the front rows of the pews wearing extravagant, colorful hats and quietly judging every single person who walked through the heavy wooden sanctuary doors. They felt it was their divine holy duty to stage an aggressive spiritual intervention for my soul. Sister Jenkins, one of the older women, said, her voice dripping with condescending pity and false warmth, "We are all just praying so incredibly hard for your deeply troubled marriage. You need to come back to the safety of the sanctuary and seek immediate repentance for abandoning your husband in his time of need." When I calmly explained to her that Marcus had filed for divorce and was actively flaunting his young executive assistant all over town, another church mother actually sighed deeply and gave me the most toxic, unbelievable advice I had ever heard in my entire life. "Well, Maya, you have to understand that powerful, successful men simply have physical needs," she said, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a deep spiritual secret with me. "Marcus is a very important corporate executive who carries a lot of stress on his shoulders. You need to pray through his temporary indiscretions and find the grace to forgive him completely. A wise woman builds her house, and sometimes that means turning a blind eye to the temptations of the devil so you can keep your family strictly together. You should honestly invite that young girl out to lunch and show her the grace and dignity of a true, godly wife." I listened to their hypocritical, dangerous nonsense, feeling a deep, righteous anger boiling hot in my chest. They were asking me to sacrifice my personal dignity, my mental peace, and my hard-earned financial security just to protect the fragile public reputation of a man who was actively trying to destroy my entire life. I politely thanked them for their misguided prayers and calmly hung up the phone. I knew right then that hiding away in my luxury apartment would only make me look guilty to the community. I needed to face them all head-on and drag Marcus out of his comfortable, holy shadows into the blazing light of the truth. When the very next Sunday morning arrived, I did not stay home in my pajamas. I woke up incredibly early and took my absolute time getting fully dressed for the occasion. I was not going to walk into that massive megachurch looking like a broken, defeated woman begging for their collective pity and sympathy. I went into my expansive walk-in closet and pulled out a flawless emerald green knit suit by St. John. It was tailored perfectly to my body, radiating absolute unbothered power and immense quiet wealth. I paired the gorgeous suit with my absolute best string of real pearls and a pair of classic black designer pumps. My hair and makeup were completely impeccable without a single flaw. But my absolute most important accessory for the morning was not my expensive designer handbag. It was a thick, crisp white envelope resting safely inside the leather purse. My ruthless attorney Desiree had called me late Thursday night with a massive piece of completely devastating new information. Her brilliant forensic accountant had kept digging deeply into the hidden offshore accounts Marcus thought were completely secure and discovered exactly how my husband had been funding his lavish romantic lifestyle with his young mistress. The $2 million hidden securely in the Cayman Islands was just the absolute beginning of his financial crimes. Marcus had also been quietly and systematically siphoning large sums of money directly from the church charity outreach fund. This was the exact same sacred fund he personally managed as a senior financial board member. He used the stolen charity money to pay for his lavish romantic getaways and expensive dinners with Chloe. I had the official bank statements, the undeniable wire transfers, and the time-stamped high-resolution photographs printed in full color. I drove my car to the church and parked right in the main VIP lot, holding my head incredibly high as I walked toward the building. I walked through the massive glass doors of the main sanctuary just as the massive choir was finishing their uplifting opening song. The exact moment I stepped into the grand carpeted foyer, the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. The hushed whispers started immediately spreading quickly through the massive crowd, like a fast-moving wildfire in a dry forest. Hundreds of heads turned sharply, and highly judgmental eyes locked onto me from every single direction. The very church mothers who had called me earlier in the week stopped dead in their tracks, their mouths hanging wide open in pure, unadulterated shock. They fully expected me to be hiding in my house, consumed by shame and regret, but instead I was walking straight down the center aisle, looking significantly better than I had in the last 10 years of my life. I calmly found an empty seat in the third row, perfectly in the direct line of sight of the elevated wooden pulpit. Marcus was sitting comfortably in the plush VIP section, designated specifically for the senior church elders and pastors. When he finally saw me sitting there, his smug, holy expression completely vanished from his face. He looked physically sick to his stomach. He started nervously adjusting his expensive silk tie and whispering frantically to the older man sitting directly next to him. But before the senior pastor could even take the massive stage to begin his morning sermon, the pastor wife intentionally intercepted me. She was a tall, highly imposing woman who absolutely loved to micromanage the large congregation and protect the pristine public image of the church at all absolute costs. She marched aggressively down the carpeted aisle and stood right at the very edge of my wooden pew, leaning over me with a tight, forced, completely fake smile on her face. "Sister Maya," she whispered loudly, her sharp voice echoing slightly in the quiet, dignified section of the sanctuary. "We are all so incredibly surprised to see you here today, considering the heavy spiritual burden resting on your household right now. I really think it would be best if you and I stepped into the private pastoral suite right now for a deeply needed spiritual intervention. You are causing quite a visual distraction to the congregation, and we need to privately discuss your recent life choices before this holy service continues any further." She reached her hand out to grab my arm and pull me out of the row, but I smoothly shifted my weight and completely ignored her reaching hand. I did not whisper back to her. I did not lower my natural speaking voice to protect their delicate, fragile sensibilities. I stood up incredibly tall, smoothing the front of my emerald green suit, and calmly opened my designer handbag. I reached carefully inside and pulled out the thick, crisp white envelope. "I am not here for a spiritual intervention." "First Lady," I said, my voice carrying clearly and confidently across the silent surrounding pews. People sitting around us completely stopped breathing, straining their necks forward to hear every single word I was saying. "I am actually here today to make a very important documented contribution to the official church financial records." I held the heavy white envelope out directly toward her. She stared at it cautiously, her forced fake smile completely slipping away from her face. "What exactly is this?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously toward Marcus, who was now gripping the armrests of his plush chair like a terrified man facing his own execution. I turned my body slightly, making absolutely sure my voice projected clearly toward the shocked church mothers and the serious financial board members sitting nearby. Inside this thick envelope, you will clearly find 30 pages of certified financial bank statements and high-resolution color photographs, I announced brightly and calmly. It seems my soon-to-be ex-husband, Marcus, has been actively using the Sacred Church Charity Outreach Fund to completely finance his luxury tropical vacations with his 32-year-old corporate mistress, Chloe. The beautiful photographs of them drinking incredibly expensive champagne in Cabo San Lucas last month are absolutely lovely to look at. But the official wire transfers showing he actively used the exact charity money designated for the community food bank to pay for their 5-star oceanfront suite are quite frankly a massive federal crime. The pastor wife face lost all its natural color, instantly turning a shocking, sickly shade of pale gray. She snatched the white envelope out of my hands as if it were on fire and frantically ripped it open. She pulled out the glossy color photographs and the bright, highlighted bank statements. Her eyes widened in absolute sheer horror as she saw the undeniable physical proof of Marcus stealing directly from the church congregation. A loud collective gasp suddenly erupted from the surrounding wooden pews as the congregation fully realized exactly what I had just said out loud. The holy righteous facade Marcus had carefully built over the last decade shattered into a million irreparable pieces in a matter of mere seconds. The older church mothers who had previously told me to turn a blind eye and tolerate his physical indiscretions were now staring directly at Marcus with pure, unadulterated disgust and rage. Stealing money from the community food bank to pay for a young mistress was the ultimate, unforgivable sin in this tight-knit religious community. Marcus jumped up quickly from his plush VIP seat, his face flushed completely dark red with intense panic and absolute sheer terror. He tried to speak out loud to defend himself, but the loud, angry murmuring of the massive congregation completely drowned him out. Several angry members of the financial board immediately stood up from their seats and began walking aggressively toward him to demand an immediate explanation. I did not stay in the sanctuary to watch him try to pathetically explain away his federal financial crimes to a massive mob of angry, betrayed churchgoers. I simply adjusted the strap of my designer handbag on my shoulder, gave the completely paralyzed pastor wife a polite, respectful nod, and turned around to leave. I walked back up the long, beautiful center aisle with the exact same quiet grace and immense confidence I had when I first arrived. The loud whispers filling the room were no longer about my allegedly failed marriage or my spiritual character. They were entirely focused on the corrupt, deceitful thief they had blindly allowed to manage their hard-earned community money. As I pushed open the heavy glass doors to step back out into the bright, warm Sunday morning sunshine, I took a deep, refreshing breath of clean air. Marcus had arrogantly tried to use his sacred religion to completely smear my good name and force my quiet financial submission. But I had just confidently delivered the absolute gospel truth directly to his entire congregation, and the pure, unvarnished truth had finally set me completely free. His reputation in the city was officially ruined. The official legal deposition took place on a rainy Tuesday morning inside the cold gray walls of a towering downtown courthouse building. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as we all took our designated seats around a heavy rectangular oak table. I sat perfectly upright in a sleek navy blue tailored suit with my hands resting calmly in my lap. Beside me sat my brilliant attorney, Desiree Washington, looking like a lethal predator about to corner her completely clueless prey. On the opposite side of the table sat Marcus wearing his usual arrogant smirk and a posture of total dominance. He leaned far back in his stiff leather chair as if he owned the entire federal building. Sitting quietly in the very back corner of the sterile room was my disgraced son-in-law, Bradley. His face was pale and covered in a thin layer of cold, nervous sweat. Bradley was currently suspended from his banking job and desperately needed to know how much legal danger he faced. The certified court reporter sat at the head of the table preparing her machine to record every single syllable perfectly. The mediator officially swore Marcus in under the strict penalty of perjury. Marcus placed his right hand firmly on the thick Bible and loudly swore to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. He looked directly across the table at me and offered a tight, patronizing smile. He genuinely believed this entire proceeding was just a tedious formality before he could walk away completely victorious. Desiree calmly opened her thick leather briefcase and pulled out a single yellow legal pad. She did not rush. She let the heavy silence fill the room, making Marcus wait for her opening question. Desiree finally adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Marcus now. State your full name and current occupation for the official record. Desiree requested, her voice smooth and completely devoid of any emotion. Marcus proudly puffed out his chest and stated his name and his impressive title as a corporate vice president of a major logistics firm. "Let us begin with the marital estate," Desiree said calmly, turning a page on her legal pad. "You previously submitted a sworn financial disclosure claiming that you do not personally own the $1.5 million primary residence in Atlanta. Is that correct, Marcus?" Marcus smiled broadly and nodded with absolute, unshakable confidence. "Yes, that is entirely correct," Marcus replied smoothly. "The property is owned by my protected corporate business trust. I do not own the physical house, so it is not subject to any division of marital assets." Desiree wrote something down on her pad and nodded slowly. "And you swear under oath today that your corporate trust is completely financially solvent and bulletproof against any outstanding external debts?" Desiree asked, her eyes locking onto his face. "Absolutely," Marcus answered without a single second of hesitation. "My corporate trust is a totally separate legal entity, completely secure right now," he proudly stated. I watched him lie smoothly without breaking eye contact. He had no idea I was the sole proprietor of Onyx Horizon LLC and legally owned the defaulted debt on that exact same trust. Desiree did not reveal our secret weapon just yet. She let his massive lie solidify permanently on the official court record. Moving on, Desiree continued casually. "Let us discuss your personal banking history over the past 6 months. Do you have any hidden financial assets, secret bank accounts, or offshore funds that you have not formally disclosed to this court today?" Marcus let out an exasperated sigh. "No, I do not have any hidden money," Marcus stated firmly, sounding incredibly annoyed by the question. "I have been completely transparent with my finances. Everything I own is listed right there in my official disclosure documents." Desiree tilted her head slightly, looking at him closely. "So you are swearing under oath right now that you do not hold any international accounts in the Cayman Islands containing approximately $2 million? She asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Marcus flinched slightly, but quickly regained his absolutely perfect composure. He scoffed loudly, shaking his very arrogant head in disbelief. "That is a completely ridiculous and desperate accusation," he declared. "I absolutely do not have any offshore accounts." Marcus lied straight to the court reporter, typing quickly. Desiree smiled a cold, terrifying smile at my husband. "Fascinating," she murmured softly. "Let us pivot to your role as a senior financial board member at your church. Have you ever used the sacred charity outreach funds for your own personal expenses or luxury tropical vacations?" Marcus slammed his hand down hard on the heavy oak table, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "How dare you attack my religion?" he shouted loudly. "I am a devoted man of faith, and I have never stolen a single penny from the church charity funds," Marcus swore vehemently. "Every single dollar goes directly to the community food bank." Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair in the back of the room, wiping the nervous sweat from his forehead. He knew about the offshore accounts because he illegally authorized the banking transfers. But Bradley did not know about the church charity theft. Desiree slowly closed her yellow legal pad and picked up a thick black folder. The trap was completely set perfectly for him right here today. "Marcus, you have just legally sworn under penalty of perjury that you have no offshore accounts and no connection to any stolen charity funds," Desiree stated clearly for the record. She opened the black folder and pulled out a stack of crisp bank statements and wire transfer receipts. She slid the heavy stack of papers across the long oak table. They came to a sudden stop right in front of Marcus and his pale attorney. "I highly suggest you look very closely at these official federal documents before you say another word," Desiree advised, coldly leaning back in her chair. Marcus grabbed the papers with trembling hands. His eyes darted rapidly across the highlighted account numbers and the undeniable Cayman Islands routing codes. The color completely drained from his arrogant face as he realized we possessed the exact undeniable proof of his massive financial crimes. His attorney leaned over and desperately whispered something into his ear, but Marcus was completely paralyzed by sheer terror. Desiree did not give him a single chance to recover. But these documents reveal something significantly worse than simple perjury and hidden marital assets. Desiree continued, her voice suddenly slicing through the silent room right now. "Look very closely at the secondary authorization signatures on those international wire transfers," Marcus Desiree instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the papers. "In order to successfully bypass the federal money laundering protocols and move $2 million out of the country, you needed a domestic proxy account. You needed to route the stolen money through a clean domestic bank account before it could be sent overseas. Marcus began to breathe heavily, his chest heaving as true panic finally set in. Bradley stood up slowly from his chair in the corner, his eyes wide with sudden fear and dark confusion. Desiree pulled out one final piece of paper and held it up for everyone to clearly see. This is a certified bank statement showing that over $2 million was quietly routed through a personal checking account before disappearing into the Cayman Islands. Desiree announced loudly. "And whose name is officially listed on that specific checking account, Marcus?" she asked him. Marcus squeezed his eyes tightly shut, completely unable to speak a word. His jaw trembled as he realized his ultimate master plan was entirely destroyed. "I will read it for the record myself," Desiree said, staring directly at him. "The domestic proxy account is legally registered to your 33-year-old daughter, Tasha Jenkins." Desiree declared, her voice echoing loudly in the cold, sterile room. The silence that followed was completely deafening and heavy. I sat perfectly still, watching the horrifying reality wash over my absolutely worthless husband. In his desperate, greedy attempt to hide his money and fund his lavish lifestyle with his young mistress Marcus, had forged his own daughter's signature. He had actively used her personal bank account to illegally launder $2 million in stolen funds entirely without her personal legal knowledge or consent. By routing the illegal funds directly through Tasha, Marcus had officially implicated his own flesh and blood in massive federal tax fraud and international money laundering. Tasha was now legally facing decades in federal prison, all because her father was a selfish, arrogant coward. In the back of the room, Bradley let out a loud, suffocating gasp. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall, as the total devastation of the situation finally hit him. Bradley realized in that exact moment that Marcus had ruthlessly thrown Tasha completely under the bus just to save himself and keep his hidden money completely safe. The heavy oak door of Marcus' luxury high-rise condominium swung open violently, hitting the interior wall with a loud, terrifying crash. Tasha stormed into the lavish living room, her face completely stained with dark running mascara, and her whole body shaking with absolute, uncontrollable panic. She had just received a frantic, terrifying phone call from her disgraced husband, Bradley, who had practically screamed the horrifying details of the legal deposition into her ear. She found her father, Marcus, sitting casually on a plush white leather sofa, holding a crystal glass of expensive amber liquor. He was wearing silk lounge pants and looking incredibly annoyed by the sudden loud interruption. Sitting directly next to him was his 32-year-old mistress, Chloe, who was busy filing her acrylic nails with a completely bored expression on her perfectly contoured face. Tasha stood in the center of the expansive room, struggling to catch her breath as she looked at the man she had blindly idolized her entire life. "Dad, what did you do?" Tasha screamed, her voice cracking with pure raw terror and confusion. "Bradley just told me about the offshore accounts and the international wire transfers. He said you forged my personal signature. He said you used my domestic checking account to illegally route $2 million out of the country. Please tell me he is completely lying right now. Tell me you did not implicate your own daughter in a massive federal tax fraud scheme." Marcus did not immediately jump up to comfort his highly distressed daughter. He did not look deeply ashamed or overwhelmingly guilty. He simply took a slow sip of his expensive liquor and let out a long, heavy sigh as if dealing with Tasha was just another tedious corporate nuisance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Tasha, calm down," Marcus said, waving his free hand dismissively in the air. "Bradley is just being a complete dramatic coward because he got himself suspended from the bank. It is really not a big deal at all. I just needed a clean domestic proxy account to bypass some annoying banking red tape temporarily. Your account was completely available and I did not want to bother you with the complicated financial details. I am your father, and I provided you with a wonderful life. You just need to take one for the team right now while my corporate lawyers sort out this minor legal headache. Take one for the team," Tasha repeated breathlessly, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated horror. "Dad, the federal government is going to investigate me. Bradley said I could be indicted for international money laundering. I could literally go to federal prison for decades because you forged my name on illegal banking documents. How can you sit there drinking liquor and tell me to just take one for the team?" Before Marcus could formulate another smooth, manipulative lie, Chloe aggressively rolled her eyes and tossed her nail file onto the glass coffee table. She looked at Tasha with absolute sheer disgust and crossed her arms over her chest. "Honestly, Tasha, you are acting like a completely spoiled brat right now." Chloe snapped, her voice dripping with intense venom and arrogance. "Your father is under an immense amount of pressure, trying to protect his hard-earned wealth from your bitter, crazy mother. He buys you luxury cars and pays off your massive credit card debts, and this is exactly how you repay him. By bursting into our private home and throwing a massive childish temper tantrum over some stupid banking paperwork. You need to grow up and stop whining because you are giving Marcus a terrible headache." Tasha completely froze. She stared at Chloe and then slowly turned her desperate eyes back to her father. She expected Marcus to immediately defend his own flesh and blood against his arrogant young mistress. She expected him to stand up and reassure her that he would never let anything bad happen to his only child. But Marcus did absolutely nothing. He just took another slow sip of his liquor and nodded his head slightly in silent agreement with Chloe. In that exact, horrifying moment, the thick, heavy blinders finally fell completely off Tasha's eyes. She realized with absolute crushing clarity that Marcus did not care about her at all. He had only used her to maintain his pristine family man image and to launder his stolen money. He had happily thrown her directly under the bus to save his own skin, and he was not going to lift a single finger to protect her from the massive federal consequences. Tasha turned around and ran out of the luxury condominium as fast as her legs could possibly carry her. She rode the elevator down to the underground parking garage, sobbing uncontrollably into her trembling hands. She climbed into her luxury SUV and drove aggressively through the busy Atlanta traffic, completely blinded by her own panicked tears. There was only one single person in the entire world who had ever fixed her massive mistakes and protected her from the harsh realities of life. She needed her mother. 30 minutes later, I was sitting quietly at the granite kitchen island of my secure luxury apartment, reviewing the latest commercial staging contracts for Onyx Horizon LLC. The entire legal deposition had been an absolute masterful victory, and I was finally enjoying a moment of pure, uninterrupted peace. Suddenly there was a frantic, desperate pounding on my heavy front door. I calmly stood up, smoothed the front of my silk blouse, and walked over to check the security monitor. It was Tasha. She looked completely unhinged. I slowly unlocked the door and pulled it open. Tasha practically collapsed right onto my beautiful hardwood floor. She was hyperventilating and grabbing onto my arms with a terrifying, desperate grip. "Mom, you have to help me," Tasha begged loudly, her voice a broken, pathetic wail. "You have to call your attorney Desiree right now and make all of this go away. Dad used my bank account to hide his stolen money, and now the federal investigators are going to arrest me. Bradley is blaming me, and Dad told me to just take one for the team. He does not care if I go to jail. You have to fix this, Mom, please. I will do absolutely anything you want, but you have to save me." She looked up at me with those wide, terrified eyes, fully expecting me to do exactly what I had done for her entire life. She expected me to swoop in and absorb all the heavy collateral damage. She expected me to sacrifice my own well-being to clean up the toxic mess her father created. I did not reach down and pull her into a warm, comforting hug. I did not speak in a soft, soothing maternal voice. I stood perfectly tall and looked down at the daughter who had publicly betrayed me at a Sunday dinner just a few weeks ago for the empty promise of her father financial support. "Stand up, Tasha," I commanded, my voice completely firm and utterly devoid of any yielding sympathy. She sniffled loudly and slowly pulled herself up from the floor, leaning heavily against the entryway wall for physical support. She wiped the dark, ruined makeup from her cheeks and looked at me with deep, utter confusion. "Mom, did you hear what I just said?" Tasha whimpered softly. "I am going to go to federal prison. I heard every single word you said," I replied, my tone cold and absolutely unwavering. "But I am not going to call my attorney to fix this for you. Desiree works strictly for me, and she is currently busy destroying the man who tried to leave me with absolutely nothing." Tasha's mouth dropped open in pure shock. "But I am your daughter!" she cried desperately. "Yes, you are my daughter," I said, stepping slightly closer to her so she could feel the absolute gravity of my words. "And for 33 years, I acted as a protective shield between you and your father's intense selfishness. When he missed your high school graduation because of a corporate golf trip, I bought you a beautiful diamond necklace and told you he was incredibly proud. When he refused to pay for your expensive destination wedding because it cut into his personal vacation budget, I quietly drained my own staging business accounts to give you the perfect day. I buffered you from his toxic, narcissistic behavior your entire life so you would not feel the painful sting of his rejection." I paused for a brief second, letting the heavy truth of my sacrifices completely sink into her panicked mind. "And how exactly did you repay me for all those years of silent protection?" I asked, staring directly into her terrified eyes. "When he walked into your grandmother's house holding the hand of his 32-year-old mistress, you smiled warmly and welcomed her into the family. You sat right there and let your arrogant husband insult my career and completely disrespect my dignity. You proudly chose your father money over my basic respect because you thought he held all the power and you wanted to be on the winning side." "Mom, I am so incredibly sorry," Tasha sobbed heavily, reaching out to grab my hand. "I was so stupid and completely blind. I know I was terribly wrong. Please do not let me go to prison." I slowly pulled my hand away from her desperate grasp. "Your apologies are completely meaningless right now, Tasha," I said, shaking my head slightly. "You are only sorry because you finally realized your father's bank accounts are completely frozen, and he threw you to the federal wolves to save his own miserable life. You made a calculated adult decision to align yourself with a corrupt, deceitful man, and now you get to deal with his massive, toxic mess completely on your own. I am no longer your protective safety net." I turned around and walked over to the sleek entryway table. I opened the small top drawer and pulled out a thick premium business card. I walked back over to my weeping daughter and held the crisp card out toward her. She took it with shaking, trembling hands and looked down at the printed words. "That is the contact information for a highly respected criminal defense lawyer here in Atlanta," I informed her smoothly. "I highly suggest you call him immediately and retain his legal services before the federal investigators show up at your house with a search warrant. You are going to need a very aggressive legal defense strategy because your father is absolutely going to testify against you to protect his corporate reputation." Tasha stared at the small rectangular piece of paper as if it were a physical death sentence. The complete horrifying reality of her situation finally crashed down upon her shoulders with the heavy, devastating weight of a concrete building. Her mother was not going to magically rescue her this time. Her father did not care if she spent the next decade locked inside a tiny federal prison cell. She had completely alienated the only genuine person who had ever truly loved her. And now she was entirely alone, facing the catastrophic legal consequences of her own absolute greed. "I am not going to fix this for you, Tasha," I said, my voice dropping to a final definitive whisper. "It is completely time for you to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet and face the real world. Please let yourself out. I have a very successful business to run." I turned my back on her and walked calmly back into my beautiful sunlit kitchen. I did not look back, even as I heard her let out one final devastating sob before slowly opening the heavy front door and dragging herself out of my completely peaceful life. The sound of the heavy wooden door clicking firmly shut behind her was the absolute sweetest sound I had heard all day. I walked over to the large floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury apartment and looked down at the bustling city streets far below. I could see Tasha walking slowly toward her expensive vehicle, her shoulders completely slumped forward in total, absolute defeat. She had always believed that living in a wealthy bubble would protect her from the standard consequences of bad behavior. She believed that name-brand clothes and luxury cars were the ultimate measure of a successful human life. But federal prosecutors did not care about designer handbags or country club memberships. They only cared about the undeniable paper trail of forged signatures and illegal international money laundering. I picked up my ceramic coffee mug and took a long, slow sip of my dark roast coffee, enjoying the rich, robust flavor. A small part of my motherly heart naturally ached to see my only child in such immense pain, but I quickly pushed that soft, useless emotion away. If I bailed her out today, she would never learn the absolute vital lesson of personal accountability. She would just continue to be a pawn in Marcus' manipulative games for the rest of her miserable life. Handing her that criminal defense lawyer business card was actually the most loving, responsible thing I had ever done for her. It was the extremely harsh wake-up call she desperately needed to finally break free from her father's toxic financial control. My phone buzzed softly on the cool granite countertop, breaking the deep silence of the apartment. It was a text message from Desiree. The message simply stated that the federal banking authorities had officially launched a full criminal investigation into the Cayman Islands accounts and that subpoenas were currently being actively drafted for both Marcus and Tasha. The massive trap had completely snapped shut. I smiled a genuine, deeply satisfied smile. Marcus thought he was the ultimate grandmaster of corporate chess, but he had fundamentally misunderstood the basic rules of the game. I was not just playing to win the divorce settlement. I was playing to completely dismantle his entire corrupt empire, brick by miserable brick. And judging by the absolute sheer panic radiating from my daughter today, the final destruction of Marcus Jenkins was already well underway. The absolute best part was that I did not even have to lift another finger. I was simply going to sit back, relax, and watch him completely destroy himself. Chloe believed she had already won the entire war. She was 32 years old and currently living rent-free inside the massive $1.5 million Atlanta estate that I had meticulously designed and paid for over the last 2 decades. In her incredibly shallow mind, the fact that I had packed my bags and walked out the front door without a single screaming match meant that I was a weak, defeated older woman who had simply surrendered her kingdom to a younger, more vibrant queen. She had absolutely no idea about the catastrophic legal deposition that had just taken place downtown, or the fact that Marcus was currently scrambling to keep himself out of a federal prison cell. Chloe only cared about securing her new wealthy lifestyle permanently. She began relentlessly pressuring Marcus every single morning and every single night, demanding that he finalize the divorce paperwork immediately so they could officially get married. She wanted the massive diamond ring on her finger and her name legally printed on the deed to the beautiful estate. Marcus tried to placate her with expensive dinners and vague, empty promises about corporate legal delays, but his mind was completely consumed by the terrifying reality that his own daughter was now facing international money laundering charges because of his greed. He was distracted and terrified, but Chloe simply mistook his sheer panic for standard executive stress. She decided she needed to take matters entirely into her own hands and publicly mark her new territory to show the entire world that she was the brand new lady of the house. On a bright Wednesday morning, while I was sitting at the large mahogany desk in my commercial staging warehouse reviewing financial spreadsheets, my phone buzzed with a social media notification. One of my loyal friends from the country club had sent me a direct link to a live video broadcast on Instagram. I clicked the link and leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, resting my chin on my hand. The screen immediately filled with the perfectly filtered face of Chloe. She was holding her smartphone high in the air, walking slowly through the grand foyer of my former home, wearing a designer silk robe that Marcus had probably bought with his stolen church charity funds. "Welcome to my new sanctuary, you guys," Chloe chirped happily to her hundreds of live viewers, tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "I am so incredibly excited to finally show you all the blank canvas I get to work with. Marcus and I are completely upgrading this entire tragic space." She turned the camera around to show the sweeping grand staircase and the imported crystal chandelier hanging beautifully from the high ceiling. I watched her broadcast with absolute icy detachment. It was almost comical to watch this arrogant young girl strut around a house that was currently facing a massive commercial foreclosure initiated by my own secret holding company. Chloe continued her live broadcast, walking directly into the massive custom kitchen. This was the exact room I had poured my heart into designing just last year. It featured pristine imported Italian marble countertops, premium stainless steel appliances, and beautiful custom-built oak cabinetry. It was an absolute masterpiece of modern interior design. But Chloe scrunched up her nose dramatically for the camera, as if she were looking at a completely dilapidated ruin. "This kitchen is just so incredibly dated and depressing," Chloe complained loudly, her voice echoing off the expensive tile floor. "It has this horrible, heavy old lady energy that simply does not match our modern corporate lifestyle. So today we are officially saying out with the old and in with the new. I am bringing in a premium demolition team this morning to completely gut this entire room, right down to the bare wooden studs. We are going to build a bright, fresh, modern space that actually reflects my personal aesthetic." I watched the little heart icons float up the side of the screen as her clueless followers praised her terrible taste. I did not feel a single ounce of anger or sadness as she insulted my beautiful home. I simply tapped the record button on my phone, capturing her entire live broadcast for Desiree to use in our upcoming court hearings. Chloe was publicly claiming ownership and making unauthorized structural changes to a property that was currently locked in a highly contested divorce and actively defaulting on its commercial mortgage. She was literally documenting her own profound legal stupidity for the entire world to see. Less than an hour after she ended her smug little live broadcast, a heavy commercial work truck pulled up the long, winding driveway of the Atlanta estate. A highly respected local contractor named Thomas walked up to the heavy mahogany front doors, carrying a thick clipboard and a large steel sledgehammer. Chloe greeted him at the door with a bright, eager smile practically vibrating with destructive excitement. She led Thomas directly into the custom kitchen, pointing wildly at the beautiful Italian marble countertops and the custom oak cabinets. "I want all of this completely gone by the end of the week," Chloe demanded, crossing her arms over her silk robe. "I want you to take that sledgehammer and smash right through that kitchen island to get things started. I want to see this depressing old aesthetic completely destroyed today." Thomas nodded professionally, setting his heavy steel sledgehammer down on the floor. He pulled a digital tablet out of his work bag to officially log his arrival and pull up the specific structural blueprints for the property before beginning the demolition. Chloe stood nearby, holding her phone up again, ready to record the very first swing of the hammer for her loyal social media followers. She wanted the absolute satisfaction of watching my beautiful creation shatter into a million jagged pieces, but the heavy swing of the sledgehammer never happened. Thomas stared at the glowing screen of his digital tablet for a long, silent moment, his thick eyebrows furrowing in deep confusion. A bright red warning banner had suddenly flashed across his official contractor portal. He tapped the screen several times, trying to refresh the public property database, but the aggressive red warning message remained stubbornly in place. Thomas slowly lowered the tablet and looked around the pristine kitchen before looking directly at Chloe. "I am incredibly sorry, ma'am," Thomas said, his voice tight with professional hesitation. "But I cannot authorize my crew to touch a single wall or cabinet in this entire house. I have to completely halt this project immediately and leave the premises." Chloe lowered her phone, her bright, eager smile instantly vanishing into a deep scowl of annoyance. "What are you talking about?" she demanded sharply, stepping closer to him. "Marcus already gave you the initial deposit from his corporate account. I am the lady of this house, and I am telling you to start the demolition right now. Do your job before I call your boss and leave a terrible review online." Thomas did not look intimidated by her petty threats at all. He simply turned the glowing tablet around so Chloe could see the bright red text for herself. "It does not matter who paid the initial deposit, ma'am," Thomas explained firmly, picking up his heavy steel sledgehammer from the floor. "An emergency cease and desist order was officially placed on this exact property early this morning by the primary commercial lien holder. According to the county records, the corporate trust that technically owns this estate has severely defaulted on its massive commercial mortgage. The private bank holding the debt has initiated an aggressive pre-foreclosure preservation order. This means absolutely no structural changes, renovations, or demolitions can legally take place on this property without the explicit written consent of the bank. If I swing this hammer, I will be committing a massive civil crime, and my company will be sued into absolute bankruptcy." Chloe stared at the bright red warning screen in complete and utter disbelief. The color drained entirely from her perfectly contoured face. "What commercial mortgage?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Marcus told me this house was completely paid off and safely protected in his corporate trust. He said nobody could ever touch it." Thomas shrugged his broad shoulders, completely uninterested in their messy domestic drama. "Well, whoever holds the debt on this trust just locked down the entire property," he said, packing his tablet back into his bag. "You need to call your boyfriend and tell him to pay his massive overdue bills. Have a good day, ma'am." Thomas walked right out the front door, leaving Chloe standing completely alone in the silent, untouched kitchen. Her mind was spinning in sheer, terrified circles. She immediately grabbed her phone and dialed Marcus' private corporate number, her fingers shaking violently. She needed him to answer the phone and tell her this was all just a ridiculous administrative mistake. She needed him to fix the problem and prove that he was still the powerful, wealthy executive she had foolishly banked her entire future on. But Marcus was not answering his phone. He was currently sitting behind his massive oak desk in his luxurious corner office, staring blankly at a terrifying email from his elite corporate board of directors. His hands were trembling so badly he could barely read the words on the screen. The trap I had carefully set with Desiree had completely and permanently snapped shut around his arrogant throat. Marcus was receiving emergency phone calls from his personal accountant, his defensive lawyers, and his corporate board, all at the exact same time. The federal banking authorities had moved with terrifying speed after Desiree reported the illegal offshore accounts and the stolen church charity funds. The Internal Revenue Service had officially stepped in and placed a massive federal freeze on every single financial account tied to Marcus Jenkins. His primary checking accounts, his high-yield savings accounts, his executive compensation packages, and his remaining corporate trust funds were all completely locked down by the federal government pending a massive criminal tax fraud investigation. He was completely cut off from all his money. He could not access a single penny to pay his expensive defensive lawyers. He could not access the stolen funds to silence his disgraced son-in-law Bradley. And most importantly, he had absolutely no liquid cash available to pay the massive defaulted commercial mortgage on the Atlanta estate. Chloe's frantic incoming call finally broke through to his private cell phone. He answered the line with a weak, defeated voice, expecting her to ask about their dinner reservations. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" Chloe screamed into the phone, completely dropping her sweet, loving facade. "A contractor just walked out of the house because he said the property has a cease and desist order. He said your corporate trust is in massive default and the bank is foreclosing on the estate. You promised me this house was completely safe. Fix this right now, Marcus, or I am packing my bags and leaving you." Marcus closed his eyes tightly as a single tear of pure, hopeless terror rolled down his aging cheek. He was sitting in a towering glass building, completely surrounded by the illusion of massive corporate wealth. But the devastating reality was that he was officially broke. He had absolutely nothing left to his name. He could not save the house. He could not save his young mistress. And he certainly could not save himself from the absolute wrath of the quiet woman he had foolishly underestimated for 30 long years. "I am so incredibly sorry," Chloe Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with absolute, complete despair. "I do not have the money. The government took everything. I have absolutely nothing left." Marcus was a man who had spent his entire adult life building a towering fortress of absolute financial arrogance. He genuinely believed that his executive title and his expensive tailored suits made him completely untouchable. But the terrifying reality of his situation was finally crashing down upon him with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. The federal government had completely frozen every single checking and savings account tied to his corporate identity. He was locked out of his high-yield investment portfolios and his executive compensation packages. He was a millionaire on paper who could not even afford to buy a cup of coffee. The most pressing catastrophe, however, was the massive $1.5 million Atlanta estate. The emergency cease and desist order had completely halted Chloe and her ridiculous kitchen demolition project. But the legal documents delivered to his corporate office that afternoon carried an even more devastating message. The private commercial bank holding the massive debt on his corporate trust had officially initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings. He had completely defaulted on the massive business loan he took out 3 years ago to fund his failed startup venture. The grace period had entirely expired. The holding company was actively moving to seize the physical property and liquidate the asset to recover their massive financial losses. Marcus sat behind his heavy oak desk, sweating as he read the formal legal notices. He knew he had absolutely no liquid cash available to pay the massive overdue balance. He knew he could not borrow money from his suspended son-in-law Bradley. He was completely out of options and rapidly running out of time. He needed to salvage whatever equity he could before the bank forcefully auctioned the estate for pennies on the dollar. He needed a desperate exit strategy to keep himself from ending up homeless. In a state of sheer absolute panic, Marcus picked up his office phone and immediately dialed his elite luxury real estate broker. He needed to list the massive Atlanta estate on the open market that very same afternoon. He desperately hoped to find a wealthy cash buyer who could close the transaction in a matter of days. He figured if he sold the house quickly, he could pay off the defaulted commercial loan and quietly pocket the remaining hundreds of thousands of dollars in property equity. He could use that remaining cash to hire a relentless criminal defense attorney to fight the federal tax fraud charges and maybe keep his young mistress Chloe from abandoning him entirely. The real estate broker, a highly connected man named Stephen, answered the phone with his usual smooth, professional tone. Marcus completely abandoned his typical arrogant posture and practically begged Stephen to list the property immediately. He lied smoothly, telling Stephen that he and his wife were simply downsizing due to the divorce and wanted a quick, clean cash sale. He promised Stephen an incredibly generous commission if he could find a buyer before the end of the month. Stephen agreed to pull the official county property records and begin drafting the exclusive listing agreement. Marcus hung up the phone and let out a long, shaky breath of temporary relief. He actually thought he had found a brilliant loophole to escape his massive financial disaster. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and loosened his expensive silk tie. He genuinely believed he was still the smartest man in the entire room. He thought his quick corporate thinking was going to save his pristine public reputation and his remaining wealth. He had absolutely no idea that his desperate scramble to sell the house was exactly what I had been patiently waiting for him to do. Just 2 hours later, Marcus' office phone rang loudly, shattering the heavy silence of his luxurious corner office. He snatched the receiver off the cradle, expecting to hear Stephen tell him that the pristine property was officially listed on the luxury market. But Stephen did not sound enthusiastic or professional. Stephen sounded incredibly confused and deeply concerned. "Marcus, there is a massive legal problem with the primary deed to your estate," Stephen said, his voice tight with hesitation. "I just pulled the official county property records and the title history for your corporate trust. You cannot legally sell this house, Marcus. You do not hold the primary authorization rights anymore." Marcus felt his stomach drop completely into his expensive leather shoes. He demanded to know exactly what Stephen was talking about. He insisted that his corporate trust owned the house, and he was the sole authorized controller of that specific trust. Stephen let out a heavy, frustrated sigh. "Your trust might technically own the physical structure," Marcus Stephen explained slowly, "but you severely defaulted on the massive commercial mortgage attached to that exact trust. And the original bank you borrowed the money from does not actually hold your debt anymore. They quietly sold your distressed mortgage note exactly 3 years ago. They sold the entire massive debt portfolio to a highly private commercial holding company." Marcus gripped the heavy phone receiver so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He demanded to know the name of the private entity that had purchased his massive debt. Stephen read the information directly from the official county records. The primary lien holder and the sole entity currently authorized to initiate the act of foreclosure is a private commercial firm registered under the name Onyx Horizon LLC. Stephen stated clearly, "They own your debt, Marcus, and they have legally locked the entire property down." Marcus slammed the phone down and immediately called his lead corporate defense attorney. He was completely frantic, pacing back and forth across his large office like a trapped wild animal. He demanded that his high-priced legal team immediately investigate this mysterious Onyx Horizon LLC. He wanted to know exactly who was running the aggressive holding company that was actively trying to seize his beautiful home. He wanted to find a wealthy corporate executive he could easily intimidate or manipulate into dropping the massive foreclosure proceedings. His lead attorney promised to launch an immediate aggressive investigation into the corporate registration records of the LLC. For the next 3 hours, Marcus sat perfectly still in his dark office, completely paralyzed by the terrifying unknown. He imagined Onyx Horizon LLC was a massive, ruthless hedge fund operating out of New York City that specialized in crushing vulnerable corporate executives. He tried to calculate exactly how much money he would need to illegally borrow from his remaining business contacts just to settle the debt. Finally, his office door opened slowly. His lead corporate attorney walked into the room carrying a thin white file folder. The older lawyer looked completely defeated and physically sick. He walked over to the heavy oak desk and placed the thin white folder directly in front of Marcus. We pulled the official state business registration records for Onyx Horizon LLC. The attorney said, his voice barely above a terrified whisper. "It is not a hedge fund, Marcus. It is a completely private, independent holding company. And you really need to read the official name printed on the absolute top line of their corporate registry documents." Marcus reached out with violently shaking hands and slowly opened the thin white folder. His bloodshot eyes scanned the top page of the official government documents. He saw the bold black letters spelling out Onyx Horizon LLC. He scanned further down the page, searching desperately for the name of the ruthless corporate executive who was actively destroying his entire life. And then his eyes locked completely onto the official signature line. The sole proprietor and absolute chief executive officer of the commercial holding company was printed in clear, undeniable black ink. Maya Jenkins. Marcus stopped breathing entirely. The room began to spin violently around him. His heart hammered against his ribs with terrifying, aggressive force. He read my name over and over again, completely unable to process the absolute catastrophic reality of what he was seeing. For his entire adult life, he had treated me like a simple-minded housewife who only knew how to arrange decorative pillows and pick out pretty silk drapes. He had coldly discarded me via a simple text message because he genuinely thought I was entirely dependent on his corporate salary to survive. He thought his young mistress Chloe was a massive upgrade because she understood his powerful corporate world. But the devastating absolute truth was finally staring him directly in the face. I was not just his discarded wife. I was not just a naive woman crying over a ruined 30-year marriage. I was the absolute chief executive officer of the massive holding company that had quietly purchased his distressed debt 3 long years ago. I was the incredibly wealthy landlord of his corporate competitors. I was the sole owner of the massive state-of-the-art commercial warehouse across town. I was the primary lien holder of his precious corporate trust. And most importantly, I was the absolute unyielding entity currently foreclosing on his massive $1.5 million Atlanta estate. I owned him completely. I was standing on the elevated catwalk of my massive commercial warehouse, looking down at the highly synchronized operations happening on the ground floor below. Forklifts were smoothly transporting pallets of premium imported furniture, and my logistics team was preparing a massive shipment for a newly constructed luxury boutique hotel downtown. For 30 years, Marcus had condescendingly referred to my career as a cute little staging hobby meant to keep me busy while he conquered the real corporate world. He never bothered to actually look at my client list or review my annual profit margins. If he had ever paid the slightest bit of attention, he would have realized that my cute little hobby had quietly evolved into a multi-million-dollar commercial enterprise. He was so completely blinded by his own towering ego that he never saw me building a massive empire right underneath his arrogant nose. Now that massive empire was the exact entity holding his entire pathetic life in a vice grip. I turned around and walked back into my sleek glass-enclosed executive office. The space was beautifully designed with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the warehouse floor. I sat down at my expansive modern desk and opened the official foreclosure documents my legal team had prepared earlier that morning. I knew it was only a matter of time before Marcus figured out the absolute truth about Onyx Horizon LLC and came crashing through my doors. I did not have to wait very long. Exactly 20 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of my executive suite suddenly burst violently open. Marcus stormed into the room, looking like a completely broken, frantic madman. His expensive tailored suit was deeply wrinkled, and his silk tie was hanging loosely around his neck. His face was flushed dark red, and he was sweating profusely. He stopped dead in his tracks the moment he stepped inside his wild eyes, darting around the massive, luxurious office, and then looking out through the glass walls at the sprawling warehouse operation below. He was completely out of breath, his chest heaving aggressively as he tried to mentally process the sheer scale of the commercial facility I commanded. He expected to find me sitting in a tiny, depressing storage unit, crying over our ruined marriage. Instead, he found himself standing inside a corporate headquarters that easily rivaled his own prestigious logistics firm. He stared at me sitting calmly behind my desk, wearing a flawless designer suit and a completely unbothered expression. "Maya, what the hell is this?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of absolute sheer terror and deep, utter confusion. He stumbled forward, resting his trembling hands heavily on the edge of my pristine desk. "My real estate broker just told me that you are the sole executive officer of Onyx Horizon LLC. He told me your holding company owns the distressed debt on my corporate trust and that you are actively foreclosing on the Atlanta estate. This has to be some kind of sick, twisted joke. Where did you get the money to buy commercial debt? How can you possibly afford a massive facility like this? You just arranged decorative pillows for local open houses." I leaned back comfortably in my ergonomic leather chair, folding my hands neatly on my lap. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of sympathetic emotion. I simply looked at him with the cold, clinical detachment of a successful business owner dealing with a highly problematic delinquent tenant. "I stopped arranging pillows for local open houses over a decade ago, Marcus," I replied smoothly, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of warmth. "My company secures exclusive million-dollar staging contracts for high-end commercial developers and international hotel chains across the entire country. I have been quietly earning significantly more money than you for the last 7 years. But you were always far too busy chasing young executive assistants and boosting your own fragile ego to ever ask about my day. You needed to believe I was small and dependent on your wealth so you could feel like a powerful, successful man. I simply allowed you to believe your own pathetic delusion." Marcus shook his head violently, completely refusing to accept the devastating reality of his total financial ruin. "You cannot do this to me, Maya," he yelled, his voice echoing loudly against the glass walls of the office. "That house belongs to my corporate trust. You have to call the bank and immediately drop the foreclosure proceedings. I will find a way to pay you back whatever money you spent buying the mortgage note, but you cannot legally take my home away from me." I let out a soft, chilling laugh that completely stopped his frantic rambling. "You really do not remember what you did 5 years ago." "Do you, Marcus?" I asked, leaning forward and resting my arms on the desk. "You are standing here demanding that I drop the foreclosure, but you completely fail to recognize that you are the exact person who dug this massive grave in the first place." Marcus stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, his face completely blank. "What are you talking about?" he whispered hoarsely. 5 years ago, you decided you were a brilliant visionary and you secretly launched that ridiculous tech startup venture without telling me a single word about it. I explained calmly, watching his face pale dramatically. You needed massive capital to fund your little vanity project, but your credit was terrible because of your hidden gambling debts. So you quietly transferred the deed of our primary marital home into a shielded corporate trust, and then you highly leveraged that exact same trust to secure a massive commercial loan. You secretly mortgaged the house to the absolute hilt, risking our entire financial future on a terrible business idea that completely failed within 6 months. Marcus swallowed hard, looking completely physically sick. "You knew about that?" he asked, his voice trembling violently. I knew about it the very second your primary bank flagged the massive loan default, I replied, slicing through his pathetic lies with surgical precision. The commercial bank was preparing to aggressively seize the estate and throw us both out onto the street. You were completely panicked and trying to hide the terrifying foreclosure notices from me. But I did not panic, Marcus. I simply took the massive profits from my highly successful staging business and I quietly formed a private holding company called Onyx Horizon LLC. I used my own corporate entity to purchase your distressed debt directly from the bank for pennies on the dollar. I saved the house from being auctioned off and I became your absolute sole primary lien holder. You have been living completely rent-free in a house that I legally own for the last 3 years. Marcus stumbled backward, falling heavily into one of the plush leather guest chairs positioned in front of my desk. He buried his face in his trembling hands, completely devastated by the sheer magnitude of his own catastrophic stupidity. He had spent years treating me like an absolute worthless burden, while I was the only reason he was not completely homeless. He had thrown his entire life away for a young mistress who only wanted him for the massive house that actually belonged entirely to his discarded wife. Maya, please, Marcus begged openly, crying, now his broad shoulders shaking with heavy, pathetic sobs. You have completely destroyed my career. The federal government froze all my accounts because of the offshore money. Bradley hates me, and Tasha is facing federal prison charges because of the wire transfers. Chloe is threatening to leave me today because the contractor told her the house is being seized. I have absolutely nothing left in this entire world. Please just show me a little bit of mercy. Stop the foreclosure and let me keep the house. After 30 years of marriage, you owe me at least that much. I stared at the broken, pathetic shell of a man sitting in my beautiful office. He was actively begging for mercy after spending 30 years treating me with absolute, unyielding cruelty. He wanted grace after serving me divorce papers via a cowardly text message. He wanted forgiveness after demanding I vacate the premises so he could move his 32-year-old mistress into my home. He wanted me to save him from the exact same devastating fire he intentionally started to burn me alive. I calmly reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a single crisp white document. It was a formal, legally binding document printed on the heavy watermarked paper of Onyx Horizon LLC. I slid the crisp white paper across the smooth surface of my desk until it stopped directly in front of him. Marcus slowly lowered his trembling hands from his tear-stained face and looked down at the paper. "What is this?" he asked, his voice completely broken. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I looked directly into his terrified, pathetic eyes and delivered the absolute, final, devastating blow. "That is a formal binding eviction notice, Marcus," I stated with absolute cold authority. "Just a few short weeks ago, you sent your expensive corporate lawyers after me. You handed me a 30-day eviction notice to completely vacate my small downtown staging boutique because you bought the commercial building and wanted to give my space to your young mistress for a ridiculous Pilates studio. You told me I was completely worthless and demanded I leave the marital estate with absolutely nothing. You tried to starve me out and destroy my entire life." Marcus stared at the eviction notice, completely unable to speak. His hands shook violently as he realized there was absolutely no escape from the legal trap I had flawlessly executed. "You gave me 30 days to leave my staging shop." "Marcus," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that echoed clearly across the quiet office, "I am being significantly more generous today. I am giving you exactly 72 hours to completely pack your bags and get the hell out of my house." "But Maya, I have nowhere to go." Marcus sobbed openly, pleading with me. "The federal authorities froze my accounts. I have no money for a hotel. I cannot afford an apartment. Where am I supposed to live?" "That is an excellent question, Marcus," I replied smoothly, standing up from my chair and straightening the jacket of my pristine designer suit. "But since your lawyers made it incredibly clear that all communication must go through official legal channels, I highly suggest you direct your housing inquiries to your attorney. Now you need to leave my commercial property immediately before I have my security team physically escort you out into the parking lot." Marcus sat frozen in the chair for a long, terrifying moment, realizing I was absolutely serious. There was no warmth left in my eyes and no sympathy left in my heart. He slowly picked up the heavy eviction notice with shaking hands, holding it like a physical death sentence. He dragged himself out of the leather chair, looking completely aged by 20 years. He did not say another word. He turned around and slowly walked out of my pristine glass office, his head hung incredibly low in total absolute defeat. I watched him walk across the catwalk and slowly descend the metal stairs, looking completely small and insignificant against the massive backdrop of my highly successful corporate empire. He thought he was throwing me away like garbage, but he was actually just handing me the final key to my absolute total freedom. Marcus had exactly 72 hours to vacate the massive Atlanta estate, but his towering arrogance would not allow him to simply accept defeat and walk away quietly. He believed he was an invincible corporate titan who could magically negotiate his way out of any massive disaster. He absolutely refused to be publicly humiliated by a woman he considered completely beneath him. Instead of quietly packing his expensive tailored suits into cardboard boxes, he put on his absolute best navy blue power suit and drove his luxury vehicle straight to the towering downtown headquarters of his highly profitable logistics firm. He had one final desperate card left to play today. He requested an emergency closed-door meeting with the senior executive board of directors. Marcus walked into the massive glass boardroom and stood confidently at the head of the polished oak table. He lied smoothly to the powerful men sitting around him. He told the board that his bitter, soon-to-be ex-wife was attempting a hostile financial takeover of his personal corporate assets. He told them he needed an immediate emergency corporate loan of $3 million to pay off his massive debts and quietly settle everything completely. He promised the board that he would completely secure this massive personal loan using the exclusive commercial rights to the proprietary logistics tracking software he had personally developed 10 years ago. This specific tracking software was the exact digital program that routed every single delivery truck and managed billions of dollars in commercial freight for the entire global corporation. It was the absolute crown jewel of his executive career and the entire reason he had been aggressively promoted to vice president in the first place. The greedy board of directors immediately agreed to the highly lucrative financial terms offered today. They were completely unaware that Marcus was actively lying straight to their serious faces about his true legal ownership of the software. Marcus walked out of the corporate boardroom feeling like an absolute conquering hero. He genuinely thought he had just completely outsmarted me and secured his ultimate financial freedom. He immediately called his expensive corporate lawyer and ordered him to draft a massive financial settlement offer. Marcus wanted to throw a pile of borrowed corporate cash directly in my face and demand that I immediately drop the foreclosure proceedings on his beautiful $1.5 million estate now. Less than 4 hours later, Marcus and his pale attorney marched proudly into the sleek downtown law office of my brilliant attorney, Desiree Washington. I was already sitting quietly at the large mahogany conference table, wearing a flawless white designer suit. Marcus did not look like a completely broken man facing an immediate eviction anymore. He looked incredibly smug and highly dangerous. He aggressively tossed a thick legal folder onto the center of the table and leaned back in his comfortable leather chair. He folded his hands behind his head and smiled a dark, terrible smile at me right then. I managed to secure a massive private corporate loan this afternoon. Maya Marcus announced, his voice dripping with intense, arrogant satisfaction. I am offering you a complete one-time payment of $3 million in clean liquid cash. You will accept this money today, and you will immediately drop the commercial foreclosure on my primary estate. You will also sign a binding non-disclosure agreement promising to never speak about my private financial affairs again. Desiree did not look intimidated by his sudden massive influx of corporate cash. She simply reached out and picked up his thick legal folder now. Desiree flipped through the pages of the proposed settlement offer, her dark eyes scanning the complex corporate financial terms. She let out a rich, deep laugh that completely shattered the tense silence in the room. This is a very impressive loan agreement, Marcus, Desiree said smoothly, tapping her manicured fingernail against the heavy paper. But I am incredibly curious about the specific collateral you used to secure $3 million from your board of directors. The federal government has completely frozen all your personal bank accounts, and your corporate trust is currently defaulting on a massive commercial mortgage right now. You have absolutely no physical assets left to leverage, Desiree stated clearly. Marcus smirked and leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the mahogany table. I leverage the exclusive commercial rights to my proprietary logistics tracking software, Marcus bragged loudly. My entire global corporation runs exclusively on the digital system I personally built 10 years ago. It is worth tens of millions of dollars in the open market. I easily convinced the senior board to loan me the cash against my future software licensing royalties. Desiree slowly lowered the document and looked at him with absolute pure predatory delight today. That is a truly fascinating financial strategy, Marcus, Desiree whispered dangerously. But it seems you have completely forgotten a very important historical detail about the initial development of that massive software program 10 years ago. Marcus frowned slightly, his arrogant smirk faltering for a brief second. What are you talking about? He demanded sharply. Desiree opened her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a single certified government document sealed with a heavy gold stamp. She slid the official document across the smooth, polished table until it came to a complete stop directly in front of my totally clueless husband today. I decided it was time for me to finally speak. 10 years ago, Marcus, you were a low-level regional manager drowning in terrible gambling debts. I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady. You had a brilliant idea for a logistics software program, but you had absolutely no money to pay the expensive developers to actually build it. Your personal credit was completely ruined, so you came crying to me and begged me to finance your big corporate dream. I completely emptied my own personal savings account to pay the massive development costs for your new software today. Marcus stared at the certified government document, his face turning completely pale as the devastating memory finally rushed back into his panicked mind. Because I personally financed the entire software development project, I insisted that our lawyers legally register the official federal patent and all the commercial licensing rights entirely under my name, I continued smoothly. You did not care about the paperwork back then because you were just desperate to get the program launched and secure your massive corporate promotion. You have been successfully taking all the professional credit for my legal property for the last 10 years now. Marcus began to breathe heavily, his chest heaving as the absolute catastrophic reality of the situation finally settled over him. I am the sole legal owner of the official patent, Marcus, I stated with absolute cold authority. You do not own a single line of that proprietary digital code. You just fraudulently pledged an extremely valuable corporate asset that belongs entirely to me to secure a massive personal loan from your incredibly greedy board of directors. That is massive federal wire fraud and a complete violation of your fiduciary duties. Marcus grabbed the document with violently shaking hands right now. He read the official federal patent registration, recognizing my name, printed clearly in bold black ink, as the sole exclusive owner of the logistics tracking software. He was completely paralyzed by absolute sheer terror. You cannot do this to me, Maya, Marcus begged loudly, his voice cracking with pure raw panic. My entire company relies entirely on that exact software to route thousands of delivery trucks every single day. If you tell the board that I lied about the software ownership, they will destroy me completely. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a heavy black ink pen. I am not going to tell your board of directors anything, Marcus, I replied calmly. I am simply going to protect my valuable commercial assets from a desperate, fraudulent thief. I picked up a second document that Desiree had quietly prepared for me earlier that morning. It was a formal legal notice of immediate software license revocation. By signing this official document, I am permanently revoking the commercial licensing agreement that allows your global logistics firm to utilize my proprietary tracking software, I explained smoothly. I signed my name in elegant sweeping letters across the bottom of the white page. I handed the document to Desiree, who faxed it to Marcus corporate headquarters. The entire global logistics tracking system went completely dark. Thousands of delivery trucks were instantly stranded. Marcus' phone began ringing frantically. He answered it with shaking hands. It was the furious chairman of the board of directors. They realized he had fraudulently pledged an asset he never owned. The chairman screamed loudly, terminating Marcus immediately for massive liability and federal fraud. Marcus dropped the phone and slumped forward, completely destroyed. His corporate career was officially over, and he was going straight to federal prison very soon today. It was late Thursday night, and the city of Atlanta was completely dark and quiet outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury apartment. I was sitting comfortably on my velvet sofa, wrapped in a warm cashmere blanket, and holding a crystal glass of expensive red wine. The soft glow of the city lights illuminated the room, creating a perfectly peaceful atmosphere. My personal and professional life had never been more incredibly secure and successful. I was finally breathing clean air after spending 30 long years suffocating under the heavy toxic weight of my husband's towering ego and constant emotional neglect. I took a slow sip of my red wine and smiled a genuine, deeply peaceful smile. I knew exactly what was happening on the other side of the city. Right now, I knew that the federal banking authorities were aggressively tearing through every single financial document Marcus had ever signed. I knew that his massive global logistics firm had officially terminated his employment and publicly severed all ties with him to protect their own corporate reputation. I knew that the absolute reality of his complete financial and social destruction was finally crashing down on his arrogant head. Tonight, the deep, peaceful silence of my apartment was suddenly broken by the sharp buzzing of my personal cell phone resting on the glass coffee table. I slowly reached out and picked up the glowing device. The bright screen illuminated the dark room, displaying the name of the man who had confidently tried to destroy my entire life just a few short weeks ago. For a brief second, I actually considered letting the call go directly to my automated voicemail. He did not deserve another single second of my precious time or my energy, but a very small, quiet part of my mind wanted to physically hear the exact sound of his absolute defeat. I wanted to hear the trembling voice of the powerful corporate executive who thought he could easily discard me with a cowardly text message. I pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I did not offer a single word of greeting. I just sat perfectly still in the dark room and listened to the heavy, frantic breathing on the other end of the cellular connection. "Maya, please, Marcus," whispered his voice, trembling so violently he could barely form the actual words. It was the frantic, pathetic sound of a completely broken man. I could hear the loud, chaotic echo of the empty Atlanta estate in the background. "Maya, you have to help me, please," he begged, crying openly and heavily into the phone receiver. Chloe left me tonight. The exact second she realized the bank accounts were permanently frozen and the house was actually being foreclosed on, she just packed all her expensive designer bags and walked right out the front door. She took the luxury car I bought for her, and she did not even look back at me. She told me I was a pathetic, broke old man, and she completely blocked my phone number. I have nobody left. Maya, I am sitting here completely alone in the dark because the utility company just shut off the electricity. He paused to take a ragged, gasping breath, choking on his own massive tears. He was completely unhinged and drowning in his own catastrophic mistakes. The corporate board of directors fired me today. Marcus continued, his voice cracking with pure raw agony. They terminated my executive contract immediately with absolute extreme prejudice. I am completely ruined in the global logistics industry. No reputable corporate firm will ever hire me again after this massive public scandal. I have absolutely no income and no savings left to my name. I took another slow sip of my red wine and listened as his pathetic desperation grew even more intense, and Bradley is officially threatening to testify against me in federal court. Marcus sobbed, his breathing becoming incredibly rapid and shallow. He is telling the federal government that I am the sole mastermind behind the illegal offshore accounts and the international money laundering scheme. He is trying to completely save himself by throwing me directly into a federal prison cell. I have absolutely nothing left in this entire world. Maya, the government took all my money, and you took my entire corporate career. Marcus was entirely hysterical now, weeping loudly into the phone like a terrified, helpless child. He had completely lost his massive house, his young mistress, his corporate power, his hidden wealth, and his entire family in a matter of a few short weeks. He was trapped completely alone in a dark, empty mansion, waiting for the federal authorities to come and arrest him. Maya, I am begging you to please find it in your heart to forgive me. Marcus pleaded desperately. I know I was completely blind and incredibly stupid. I let my massive ego and my ridiculous greed completely destroy the best thing that ever happened to me. You are the only person who ever truly loved me for exactly who I was. You built me from the ground up, and I foolishly threw you away for absolutely nothing. He was grasping blindly at the 30 years of shared history we had built together, hoping to find a single shred of the loyal, devoted wife he had so casually discarded. We were married for 30 years, Maya. Marcus cried, his voice echoing sadly in his dark, empty house. We built a beautiful family and a whole entire life together. You cannot just let me rot in a federal prison cell. You have the money and the corporate power to completely fix this massive nightmare. You can hire the best defensive lawyers in the country and help me fight these terrible federal charges. We can start completely over. I will do absolutely anything you want me to do. I will spend the rest of my entire life making this up to you. Please, Maya, just give me one more second chance to be the good husband you always deserved. I sat perfectly still on my velvet sofa, looking out at the beautiful glowing lights of the massive city. I let him cry. I let him pour his pathetic broken heart out. Into the phone, I let him beg for his miserable life. I listened to his desperate apologies and his empty promises. I thought about the thousands of nights I had waited up for him to come home while he was out spending our money on other women. I thought about the way he arrogantly threw a 30-day eviction notice at me and demanded I leave my staging boutique. I thought about the sheer disrespect he showed me at Sunday dinner when he paraded his 32-year-old mistress in front of my own family. He was not genuinely sorry for any of the terrible things he had done to me. He was only sorry because he had finally been caught and completely destroyed. He only wanted me back because I was the absolute CEO of Onyx Horizon, LLC, and he needed my massive wealth to save him from federal prison. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or sympathy for the broken man crying on the other end of the line. I felt completely empty and wonderfully free. I waited until his heavy sobbing finally subsided into quiet, pathetic whimpers. He was waiting desperately for me to speak. He was waiting for the soft maternal voice of the woman who used to fix all his massive mistakes. I slowly lowered my crystal wine glass to the table. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. I took a deep, calm breath of clean, quiet air. As per your explicit instructions, all communication regarding our relationship must go strictly through my lawyer. I stated, my voice perfectly flat, cold, and devoid of any human emotion. Do not call this number again. I did not wait for his shocked response. I did not wait to hear him scream or cry or beg for another chance. I simply moved my thumb and pressed the red button on the glowing screen. Click! The cellular connection was instantly severed, completely, cutting off his pathetic voice forever. I set the phone face down on the glass coffee table and leaned back comfortably against the soft velvet cushions. The apartment returned to its perfect, deep, peaceful silence. Marcus was finally and permanently completely isolated. He was utterly trapped in a massive, terrifying web of his own arrogant making. He had absolutely no money, no powerful corporate allies, no young mistress, and no family left to save him. He was completely alone in the dark, waiting for the absolute inevitable end. And I was simply going to finish drinking my expensive red wine and go to sleep now, peacefully knowing that I had finally won the entire brutal war tonight. The final divorce settlement hearing was scheduled for a crisp Tuesday morning in the private chambers of a highly respected federal family court judge. The massive stone courthouse loomed over the downtown district like a monument to absolute truth and final justice. I walked through the heavy metal detectors and rode the polished brass elevator to the top floor wearing a flawless tailored burgundy suit that radiated complete authority and quiet power. My brilliant attorney, Desiree Washington, walked right beside me, carrying a heavy leather briefcase that contained the absolute destruction of my husband's entire life. We entered the judge's private chambers, which were lined from floor to ceiling with thick law books and dark mahogany paneling. I took my seat in a plush leather chair, crossing my legs elegantly and placing my hands softly in my lap. I did not feel a single ounce of nervous energy or lingering anxiety. I felt completely at peace because I knew the massive trap we had built was about to officially close forever. Exactly 10 minutes later, the heavy wooden door to the chamber slowly pushed open. Marcus walked into the quiet room, and the sheer physical transformation he had undergone in just a few short weeks was absolutely staggering. He looked as though he had aged 10 full years since the last time I saw him. Sitting in my commercial warehouse, his broad, confident shoulders were completely slumped forward in deep physical defeat. The expensive tailored navy blue power suits he used to wear with such arrogant pride were completely gone. Since the federal government had frozen all his financial accounts and seized his assets, he was forced to wear an incredibly cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it had been pulled directly from a discount rack. His hair was unkempt, and the dark circles under his bloodshot eyes told the undeniable story of a man who had not slept a single peaceful hour in weeks. He dragged his feet across the plush carpet and heavily dropped into the chair opposite me without making any eye contact. He was entirely broken, completely stripped of the powerful corporate executive illusion he had hidden behind for 30 long years. His pale, exhausted attorney sat quietly beside him, looking incredibly eager to simply get this catastrophic case completely off his professional desk. The Honorable Judge. Eleanor Vance entered the room, wearing her heavy black robes. She was a stern, highly intelligent, older black woman who absolutely did not tolerate foolishness or perjury in her courtroom. She took her seat behind the massive, elevated oak desk and adjusted her reading glasses. She opened the incredibly thick case file resting in front of her and let out a long, heavy sigh. The room fell into absolute dead silence as the judge slowly turned the pages, reviewing the absolute mountain of damning evidence Desiree had meticulously compiled and submitted over the last month. The judge looked at the sworn financial disclosure documents where Marcus had confidently lied under oath about his hidden offshore money. She reviewed the certified bank statements, proving he had actively laundered $2 million through our daughter's personal checking account. She read the official internal documents from the church charity outreach fund, showing exactly how he had stolen community money to finance his tropical vacations with his 32-year-old mistress. And finally, she spent a very long time reviewing the certified commercial deeds and the active foreclosure notices, proving that my private holding company, Onyx Horizon LLC, legally owned the massive defaulted debt on his primary corporate trust. Judge Vance slowly lowered her reading glasses and stared directly down at Marcus with an expression of pure, absolute disgust. I have been sitting on the federal family court bench for over 25 years. Mr. Jenkins, the judge began, her voice incredibly sharp and echoing loudly in the small chamber, and I can honestly say that I have never seen a more despicable, arrogant, and completely fraudulent display of financial abuse in my entire judicial career. You sat in a formal legal deposition, and you openly committed federal perjury. You intentionally hid millions of dollars in the Cayman Islands. You stole from a sacred community charity fund, and you callously implicated your own daughter in a massive international money laundering scheme just to protect your own selfish interests. You attempted to leave your wife of 30 years with absolutely nothing while you secretly funded a lavish lifestyle with a much younger woman. Marcus kept his head completely bowed, staring down at his cheap, scuffed shoes. He did not try to speak. He did not try to offer a smooth corporate lie or manipulate the narrative. He knew he was standing in front of a powerful judge who saw right through his pathetic, empty soul. Judge Vance picked up her heavy wooden gavel and prepared to deliver the final official ruling on our marital dissolution. Because of the overwhelming, undeniable proof of your egregious financial fraud and your direct violation of the post-nuptial infidelity clause you forcefully demanded 15 years ago, This court is taking unprecedented punitive action. Judge Vance declared firmly, I am officially awarding 100% of all existing marital assets directly to Maya Jenkins as full legal restitution for your financial crimes. The judge continued her devastating ruling without a single moment of hesitation. The $1.5 million Atlanta estate is hereby transferred entirely to Onyx Horizon, LLC, to settle the defaulted commercial mortgage. You forfeit any and all claims to the offshore accounts, which will be fully recovered and legally transferred to your wife. Furthermore, because you maliciously attempted to bankrupt her business and intentionally dragged out these legal proceedings with fraudulent claims, I am ordering you to personally pay the entirety of Desiree Washington's exorbitant legal fees. You are walking away from this 30-year marriage with absolutely nothing. Mr. Jenkins, you are entirely stripped of your assets, your properties, and your financial dignity. Marcus let out a soft, pathetic whimper, closing his eyes tightly as the heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block with a loud, sharp crack. The divorce was officially completely finalized. I was a completely free, wealthy, and independent woman. The judge signed the final heavy stack of legal papers and briskly walked out of the chambers, leaving the rest of us sitting. In the heavy, thick silence, Desiree calmly packed her files back into her sleek leather briefcase, smiling a deeply satisfied, professional smile. She gave my shoulder a gentle, reassuring squeeze before stepping out into the hallway to speak with the court clerk. I remained seated in my chair, slowly gathering my own designer purse and smoothing the fabric of my burgundy suit. Marcus slowly lifted his heavy head and looked at me across the large, polished table. His eyes were completely red and filled with absolute sheer devastation. He asked his pale, exhausted attorney to please leave the room for just a few minutes so he could speak privately with me. The attorney nodded quickly and practically ran out the door, eager to escape the toxic, depressing atmosphere. We were completely alone in the quiet judge chambers for the very first time since he had coldly texted me those cruel eviction demands months ago. Marcus stared at me, his face twisting with a mixture of deep pain and absolute terrified confusion. He looked at my perfectly styled hair, my flawless tailored suit, and the absolute calm, unbothered expression on my face. He could not understand how the quiet, devoted woman who used to happily cook his Sunday dinners and wash his clothes had meticulously orchestrated his complete, absolute destruction. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking completely dry and hoarse. "How did you do this? How did you turn into this person? I just do not understand how you got so incredibly cold." I stopped adjusting my purse and looked directly into his pathetic, broken eyes. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness or regret. I did not feel the need to comfort him or offer him any gentle closure. He wanted to believe that I had somehow turned into a cruel, heartless monster because that narrative made him feel like a victim. It made him feel less responsible for his own catastrophic failures. But I was not going to let him escape the heavy, absolute truth of what he had done. I stood up slowly from my leather chair, towering over his slumped, defeated figure. I looked down at the man who had confidently tried to throw me away like a piece of worthless garbage. I did not get cold. "Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly steady, smooth and echoing clearly in the silent wood-paneled room. "I got smart. You spent 30 long years completely underestimating me. You thought because I was quiet and devoted that I was stupid. You thought my kindness was a weakness you could easily exploit for your own selfish gain. You thought you could build your entire arrogant life on my back and then simply kick me to the curb the very second you decided you wanted a younger model." I walked slowly around the heavy oak table, stopping just a few feet away from where he sat completely paralyzed in his chair. "You demanded I leave my own house. You tried to freeze my business accounts. You tried to turn my daughter against me, and you completely ruined her life in the process." I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal, quiet whisper. "I did not actively destroy you. Marcus, I simply stopped quietly protecting you from yourself. I just stepped out of the way and finally let you pay the absolute heavy price for your own massive, towering arrogance." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He just stared at me, completely shattered, realizing that every single word I said was the undeniable, absolute truth. He had built the massive, lethal trap completely by himself, and he had happily walked right into it. I turned my back on him without another single word. I walked purposefully toward the heavy wooden door, the steady, confident click of my designer heels echoing loudly on the polished floor. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the bright, bustling courthouse hallway, leaving him sitting completely alone in the dark shadows of his own spectacular, absolute ruin. The massive financial shockwave that completely destroyed Marcus Jenkins did not stop at the heavy wooden doors of the federal courthouse. It rippled violently outward, completely devastating the arrogant young man who had foolishly tried to play a high-stakes corporate game without fully understanding the deadly rules. Bradley, my incredibly smug son-in-law, had spent his entire adult life relying entirely on his expensive pastel polo shirts and his fake financial bravado to intimidate everyone around him. He genuinely believed that his entry-level position at the retail banking division made him an untouchable master of the universe. But the absolute reality of his massive federal fraud came crashing down on his head with terrifying speed. The internal banking auditors did not show him a single ounce of professional mercy or corporate grace. They aggressively combed through every single keystroke he had ever made on his secure terminal, and they found the exact digital fingerprints he left behind when he illegally authorized the offshore wire transfers for Marcus. The bank immediately terminated his employment with absolute extreme prejudice, but the devastating punishment did not stop there. They formally reported his illegal financial activities directly to the federal regulatory boards, effectively stripping him of his official banking licenses permanently. He was completely and utterly disgraced in the financial sector. His arrogant face was plastered across internal corporate watch lists, ensuring that no reputable financial institution would ever hire him to manage so much as a basic checking account again. Without his lucrative banking salary and the endless stream of secret financial bailouts from his corrupt father-in-law, the shiny illusion of his wealthy lifestyle evaporated instantly. The massive 4-bedroom brick house that I had personally financed for them went into immediate foreclosure. They were violently forced to pack their expensive designer clothing into cheap cardboard boxes and abandon the wealthy suburbs completely. Tasha and Bradley moved into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood, sitting completely surrounded by the overwhelming, terrifying reality of their own massive mistakes. The walls of their new home were incredibly thin, and the constant noise of the busy city streets outside served as a permanent, painful reminder of the massive luxury they had foolishly thrown away for absolutely nothing. It was inside that tiny, depressing apartment that my daughter Tasha finally woke up from the heavy toxic spell she had been living under her entire life. She spent weeks sitting on a cheap second-hand sofa, staring blankly at the peeling paint on the walls, crying until she had absolutely no tears left to shed. She finally realized that the arrogant men she had blindly chosen to follow had driven her directly off a massive financial cliff. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, my office receptionist buzzed my desk to inform me that Tasha was standing in the lobby of my commercial staging warehouse. She did not demand to see me. She simply asked if I could spare a single minute of my time. I walked out of my glass-enclosed office and found my daughter standing near the entrance, looking completely shattered. She was wearing plain sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, a stark contrast to the expensive luxury brands she used to proudly flaunt. Her face was incredibly pale, and her eyes were completely swollen from weeks of endless crying. The very second she saw me walking toward her, she completely broke down. She did not try to offer any empty excuses or blame her terrible decisions on the incredible pressure from her father. She simply fell into my arms, weeping with a deep, raw sorrow that finally felt entirely genuine. "Mom, I am so incredibly sorry." Tasha sobbed heavily, burying her face against my shoulder. I was so completely blind and terribly arrogant. I chose Dad and his money because I wanted the easy life, and I let Bradley disrespect you right in front of my face. You were the only person who ever truly protected me, and I completely betrayed you for a man who happily threw me to the federal investigators to save his own skin. I am so sorry for everything I did to you. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I just needed to tell you that you were completely right about everything. I have absolutely nothing left, and I am terrified of going to prison. I stood in the massive, brightly lit lobby of my commercial staging warehouse and held my weeping daughter tightly in my arms. I gently stroked her hair, letting her cry out all the heavy, toxic poison that had been building up inside her for years. I felt a deep, profound sense of maternal love wash over me, but I also knew that I could not let my natural motherly instincts completely override my hard-earned wisdom. I pulled back slightly and looked directly into her tired, swollen eyes. "I forgive you, Tasha," I said, my voice incredibly soft but completely firm and unwavering. "I will always love you because you are my only child, and my door will always be open to you when you need emotional support or a warm meal. But I need you to completely understand the new absolute reality of our relationship. I am drawing a very hard, permanent boundary today. I will not give you or your disgraced husband a single dime to pay your rent or fund your daily lifestyle. You and Bradley must learn how to survive in the real world completely on your own. You need to find a job, you need to pay your own bills, and you need to build your own life from the absolute ground up. I will no longer act as the endless financial safety net for your massive mistakes." Tasha nodded slowly, her tears falling silently down her cheeks. She did not argue. She did not throw a massive childish temper tantrum or demand that I write her a check. She simply accepted the harsh, heavy truth of my words. However, I continued smoothing a stray lock of hair away from her face. "I will not let your father completely destroy your entire future to save his own miserable life. I have officially retained the absolute best criminal defense lawyer in Atlanta to handle your federal fraud case. I have already paid the exorbitant legal retainer in full, and he is actively working with the federal prosecutors to secure you a full immunity deal in exchange for your complete testimony against Marcus. I will protect your freedom, Tasha, but I will never buy your lifestyle ever again." She threw her arms around my neck and hugged me with a fierce, desperate gratitude that finally felt entirely real. While my daughter was finally taking her very first painful steps toward genuine independence and personal redemption, the man who had caused all this massive destruction was experiencing a completely different kind of reality. Marcus Jenkins, the formerly untouchable vice president of global logistics, was now living an absolute nightmare entirely of his own making. 6 months after the final divorce decree was officially signed, I was driving my luxury car through a busy suburban shopping center on my way to a massive commercial staging consultation. I stopped at a red traffic light and happened to glance over at a large discount retail store situated on the corner. Walking out of the sliding glass doors, wearing a cheap blue polyester vest over a faded dress shirt, was my former husband. He was carrying a large plastic trash bag, heading toward the commercial dumpsters in the back parking lot. Marcus had managed to avoid a lengthy federal prison sentence by completely liquidating his remaining retirement accounts to pay the massive government fines. But the profound financial devastation left him entirely destitute. Without his powerful executive resume and carrying the heavy, permanent stain of public corporate fraud, he was completely unemployable in the professional business sector. The church congregation that used to hang on his every holy word had completely excommunicated him, casting him out as a total pariah. He was now working as a mid-level shift manager at a discount retail store, spending his long, exhausting days dealing with angry customers and unloading heavy cardboard boxes from delivery trucks. I watched him struggle to lift the heavy trash bag into the metal dumpster, his shoulders completely slumped in permanent, absolute defeat. He looked incredibly old and deeply miserable, a man entirely broken by his own towering arrogance and endless greed. He had sacrificed his beautiful home, his loyal wife, his entire family, and his pristine reputation for a young mistress who abandoned him the very second the money ran out. The traffic light turned green, and I smoothly pressed the accelerator, driving my beautiful luxury car away from the pathetic sight without looking back. Even once I had successfully reclaimed my absolute total freedom and built a massive empire on the ashes of his deceit. Exactly 6 months have passed since the heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block in the federal family court, completely finalizing my divorce and legally transferring absolute ownership of my entire life back into my own hands. I am currently sitting at a small, beautiful outdoor cafe in the absolute heart of Paris, France. The late afternoon air is perfectly crisp, and the sky is painted in breathtaking shades of pink, orange, and soft gold. A tall crystal flute of incredibly expensive vintage champagne rests gently on the small wrought iron table, sitting directly in front of me. As I take a slow, deliberate sip, the tiny, crisp bubbles dance perfectly on my tongue, and I look out across the historic city, completely mesmerized by the towering, majestic iron structure of the Eiffel Tower, glowing beautifully against the fading evening sunlight. For the very first time in my entire 56 years of life, I am not rushing to meet a demanding, overwhelming schedule. I am not cooking a massive Sunday dinner for completely ungrateful family members, and I am certainly not shrinking my own massive personality down to fit inside the suffocating, toxic shadow of an incredibly arrogant corporate husband. I am completely, entirely, and beautifully free. The heavy, suffocating, toxic weight that rested on my tired shoulders for 30 long years has been entirely lifted, leaving behind a deeply confident woman who is finally experiencing absolute, pure, unadulterated peace in her heart. My commercial staging company, Onyx Horizon LLC, did not just survive the massive, chaotic turbulence of the divorce proceedings. It absolutely thrived and expanded with a level of explosive, unprecedented growth that even I could not have fully predicted at the time. Once I was no longer secretly pouring my massive business profits into paying off Marcus' hidden gambling debts or silently funding Tasha's endless luxury lifestyle. I was finally able to aggressively reinvest my own wealth directly back into my own powerful corporate empire. The business has officially gone completely national. We recently opened massive state-of-the-art commercial staging warehouses in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York City, employing hundreds of incredibly talented, dedicated professionals. My elite design team now exclusively handles the absolute highest tier of luxury commercial real estate contracts in the entire country. I am no longer just a quiet local business owner operating a cute little hobby shop. I am a highly respected national chief executive officer commanding an incredibly powerful corporate enterprise that easily generates tens of millions of dollars in clean liquid revenue every single year. I am incredibly wealthy, absolutely at peace, and entirely unbothered by the petty, trivial domestic dramas of the past. The massive $1.5 million Atlanta estate that I successfully foreclosed on was quickly liquidated by my holding company, and I used those exact funds to purchase a stunning modern penthouse apartment overlooking the beautiful, bustling Atlanta skyline. I designed every single square inch of my brand new home entirely for myself, without having to compromise my artistic aesthetic vision for a man who constantly told me my personal taste was dated and depressing. Every single morning, I wake up in a beautiful, quiet sanctuary that I built completely on my own, and every single night I go to sleep knowing that absolutely nobody can ever take my hard-earned safety away from me again. I rarely ever think about Marcus anymore. The deceitful man who tried to completely destroy me is nothing more than a fading, distant memory, a ghostly shadow of a terrible, emotional mistake I finally corrected. He is still working his miserable, exhausting retail shifts, completely erased from the powerful, prestigious corporate world he used to proudly dominate. His beautiful young mistress, Chloe, is long gone, having abandoned him the exact second the luxury cars were repossessed, and his false holy reputation in the megachurch community is permanently, completely shattered. He thought he was the undisputed, invincible king of the world, but he was simply a foolish, greedy man building a massive, fragile castle completely out of dry, shifting sand. The absolute moment the tide finally came and his entire fake illusion washed away, leaving him with absolutely nothing but massive federal fines and deep public humiliation. Tasha is still living in her tiny, cramped apartment, slowly learning how to survive on a basic entry-level corporate salary without a massive family trust fund or a platinum credit card to magically save her when things get tough. It is incredibly difficult for her, but she is finally beginning to deeply understand the true, absolute value of a single dollar and the heavy, vital importance of personal accountability. We speak on the phone occasionally, and her voice is slowly losing that arrogant, entitled, whining edge she used to carry. She is becoming a real, independent adult. And while the massive emotional growing pains are incredibly harsh, I know she will eventually thank me for entirely refusing to bail her out. Bradley is still completely disgraced and permanently banned from the prestigious financial sector, constantly blaming everyone else for his own massive federal crimes. But their toxic, failing marriage is no longer my personal problem to solve. I have successfully cut the heavy dead weight completely out of my life, and the soaring, absolute freedom I feel right now is the most intoxicating, incredible sensation in the entire world. I slowly pick up my crystal glass and take another long, deeply satisfying sip of the cold, crisp champagne, watching the beautiful glowing lights of the Eiffel Tower begin to softly twinkle in the darkening, romantic Parisian sky. I want to take this quiet, beautiful moment to speak directly to every single woman watching my story today. Ladies, never ever let a highly toxic, arrogant man convince you that your quiet dignity and your peaceful, silent strength are somehow signs of pathetic submission or weakness. Never let a romantic partner make you feel like you are completely small, insignificant, or entirely dependent on their fragile financial success to survive in this harsh world. You are incredibly powerful and entirely capable of building your own massive empire completely from the ground up. Protect your absolute peace of mind, protect your hard-earned financial assets, and never, ever be afraid to simply step out of the way and let a toxic, manipulative man walk right into his own devastating legal trap. You do not always have to scream or fight or throw massive destructive temper tantrums to completely win the war. Sometimes the absolute most lethal, powerful move you can possibly make is to simply remain perfectly calm, gather your undeniable physical evidence, and legally outsmart the exact people who foolishly thought you were nothing more than a naive, blind fool. You owe it to yourself to completely own your unique story and to fiercely protect the beautiful, peaceful life you have worked so incredibly hard to carefully build. Do not ever apologize for demanding absolute, basic human respect, and never settle for a partner who requires you to constantly shrink your own massive potential just to make them feel artificially tall. If my personal story has resonated with you today, I want you to deeply know that you are absolutely not alone in this fight. Have you ever had to legally outsmart someone who thought you were a completely clueless fool? Have you ever had to draw a hard, permanent boundary with toxic, manipulative family members to completely save yourself from ruin? I would absolutely love to hear your personal, inspiring stories of ultimate triumph and fierce resilience in the comments section below. Please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this specific video with any woman who desperately needs to hear that there is a beautiful, peaceful, highly successful life waiting for her on the exact other side of a terrible, painful divorce. Your absolute best days are still ahead of you, and you possess the immense, incredible power to rewrite your entire future. Starting right now today, I gently set my empty crystal champagne flute down on the small wrought iron table and pull a few crisp, colorful euro banknotes from my designer leather wallet. I leave a very generous financial tip for the incredibly polite waiter who served me today, smoothing the colorful paper money flat onto the cold iron table surface. I gather my elegant silk designer scarf, wrapping it warmly and securely around my shoulders as a cool, gentle evening breeze sweeps through the historic, romantic cobblestone streets of Paris. A genuine, bright, radiant smile completely takes over my face, reaching all the way up to my eyes and filling my entire spirit with pure, unadulterated joy. I stand up gracefully from the outdoor table, turn my back on the little busy cafe, and begin to slowly walk down the beautiful, wide avenue, stepping confidently right into the gorgeous, glowing Parisian sunset. I am a proud, fearless woman, entirely, completely unbothered, absolutely triumphant, and entirely ready for whatever massive, beautiful adventures the rest of my incredible independent life has to offer, because I finally realize I am entirely unstoppable now forever. The world is incredibly vast and completely open to me, and I am going to embrace every single beautiful moment of it with absolute open arms and a completely fearless, fiercely independent heart right here today.